Chapter 1. So it begins, with a truck. It was getting late. The street lights flickered around while someone coughed in the distance. The wind howled while people were trying to get to their homes. Little drops of water started appearing on the glass windows, followed by gentle tapping. A certain man was sitting in a lit room, holding what looked to be a soldering iron. His hair was slightly unkempt, and you could see a reflection of some kind of schematic coming of the glasses he was wearing. He was glancing between this schematic and the circuit board that was on the table. I need to replace these capacitors, not sure which one is the faulty one. I'll just replace all of them. The man gave out a sigh while slowly getting his tools ready. He was glancing onto the circuit board with the help of a microscope. The tiny metallic parts, hard to spot with the naked eye. That bastard made me work overtime again. This man was in his mid-20s. He was at a small computer repair shop. He was yet again forced to stay late into the day. Being the new kid in this place apparently put a bull's eye on your back. The older workers always found a way to push their overdue workload on him, always giving him the excuse that he needed more experience and he should work harder. Dem fuckers only do this shit because I can't refuse. He was still new, he was still in his trial period, so he was expendable. He made the decision of trying to get along with his coworkers and play the nice guy. This was the result. He was stuck working and would probably be home at 8. Well, not like I have any plans anyway. At least they don't force me to clean all those dirty laptops. What do those people do with them to get them so dirty anyway? The sound of sizzling filled the area while the man continued with his work. The capacitors were replaced and everything was checked again. The circuit board he was fixing was in working order once more. Finally, just need to clean this shit and I'm done. He wasn't alone here though. The whole repair shop was the building that his boss was actually living in. The bottom level was just the shop while the upper was the living quarters. He threw the door leading upstairs and shouted out, "I'm done. I'm going home, boss." He heard some kind of grunt that was muffled by the sounds of a fee. He just shrugged and grabbed his coat to go. Luckily he took his umbrella today. The moment he walked outside, he was hit with a sudden gust of wind that almost snapped it in half though. God damn, if I left normally, I wouldn't be stuck in this damn storm. He kicked a pebble while his umbrella shook from the pouring rain and strong winds. He felt dejected with his whole situation, but not like he could do anything about it. He was living alone and needed it to pay rent. He barely had enough for an internet connection and food and was living from paycheck to paycheck. Ugh, if I ever get out of this shithole, I'm going to open my own store. Working for others sucks. He arrived at a crosswalk. The howling wind was smashing into his face, and the lack of earphones and music to listen to was making this whole ordeal even harder to last through. The only thing making him power through this was the warm bed waiting at home. While his mind was elsewhere, the light at the crosswalk turned green, and he took a step forward. Luck wasn't on his side yet again. When he was about halfway across the street, a large truck appeared out of nowhere. He looked to the shining halogen lights that blinded him momentarily. The vehicle came right at him. His mind went blank and his life flashed through his eyes. He remembered his youth, his family, and his lack of friends. It was a life of mediocrity, a life of following the status quo. Then suddenly he snapped out of it. His body jolted forward as he jumped for his dear life. He felt air pressure from his back accompanied by a large splash of water. He tumbled forward onto the sidewalk, the large truck just continuing on as if nothing happened. He didn't even have time to glance at the plates. He was drenched in the rainwater, his hands scraped from the pavement. Fucking psycho. He cursed while standing up. His palms were bloody and he was all wet, but luckily he was alive. His umbrella was in the middle of that street, flattened by the truck that almost killed him. His heart was pounding and he needed some time to calm down, but the pouring rain was making things hard. I need to get home. He turned around while gritting his teeth, the fear replaced by anger as he headed home. He was drenched, his body was hurting, and he still wasn't back home. There was a possibility that he could catch a cold. The only thing on his mind now was to take a warm shower. Sometimes I wish I could afford a bathtub. It always comes down to money. He moved forward. His apartment wasn't far away from where he worked. This was the only saving grace of his job. He could reach it on foot within 30 minutes, which saved him some money. Suddenly he felt a shiver run down his spine. It wasn't the cold rain, but more of a premonition. He could hear an engine revving not too far away from where he was. He slowly turned around, his eyes bulging slightly as he saw the exact same truck that almost turned him to meat paste. What? The truck was progressively getting louder, its front lights turned off. By instinct he started backing away. The halogens turned on and shone at the street that he was in. There were buildings on both sides and no space to duck to the side. When the truck that had it in for him took off, so did he, running for his life like never before. Holy shit! Who is this fucker? He bolted forward. There was no one beside him in the streets, no other cars in sight besides the honking truck behind him. The street was eerily empty, only one scrawny man running away from a big truck that went faster and faster. I need to call the police. Where's everyone? He continued running, his gaze focused on the end of the street, a small alleyway there. He didn't look back, he didn't falter as he just kept running, mustering everything that his gamer body could muster. With a last-ditch effort he dived forward. A gust of wind felt behind him as the truck barreled past him while he jumped into the narrow passage. He landed on his face, his hands getting scraped even more and blood running out of his nose. He quickly rolled up, trying to see if he was safe, the truck vanishing seemingly into thin air after clipping part of the building that connected to this alleyway. Fuck, it shouldn't be able to get me here, but what if the driver chases after me instead? He was sweating bullets, tired and afraid. This wasn't over, he didn't think so. He turned around and quickly escaped into the alleyway, nothing in it besides trash and rats. He jogged forward, exhausted from the previous sprint. The other side. There is a police station on the other side. He saw the light at the end of the tunnel. Not far from here there was a small police unit. He only needed to get there and report this fucker and everything. But as he was treading forward, the lights in the vicinity started to flicker continuously. Abruptly all of the light bulbs that lighted the way forward shattered into pieces, and everything went dark, and then he heard it again, the revving of the engine. And, no, stay away in front, he could see the damn truck. It was barely able to fit into this narrow passage, scraping the walls as it slowly drove forward. He quickly turned away. To his surprise, he heard the same engine noise. Another truck blocking his path was there too. The area filled with the screeching noise of scraping metal as the two trucks drove at him, each second increasing in speed. Ha ha ha, he started laughing, his face showing a shaky smile as he lost it. He looked to the sides, walls blocking his path of escape. Screw you! He moved to the wall, his fingers digging into the hard concrete wall. As he tried climbing up, his fingernails broke, blood gushing out as he scratched trying to climb up, but to no avail as the rainwater made it far too slippery. The last things that he saw were the bright truck lights coming from the sides. He tried looking into the driver's seat, his eyes bulging, his jaw clenched as he tried to see the person responsible. To his surprise, he didn't see anything, not even a silhouette of a driver, the truck seat totally empty. Splat! That was the last thing that he saw. His short life of a computer repairman ended right there. He felt resentment in his eyes. There were things that he wanted to achieve. Simple things, like a business of his own, where he could dictate the rules and not be a slave to his wage for the rest of his life. But he was also looking at the bright side. He was now free from the worldly problems. He floated in the void, his mind racing as it couldn't comprehend where it was. This state of mind didn't last for long as he felt being drawn somewhere. It was as if something or someone was calling him there. RD&D, he heard a voice. It was a gentle-sounding voice that belonged to a woman. Masar.lan. PL.Azumu.whack. P. He felt strange, like his whole being was getting pulled somewhere. He continuously heard the voice. It was calling out to him, but he didn't recall the name that the woman was saying. Roland? The voice that seemed distant started getting closer, and he started feeling nauseous and tired. The only saving grace this time around, he felt something. He tried moving, but his body felt sluggish. He could barely wiggle his finger. He moved. Master Roland moved. Oh, thank the gods. He felt sick, like he was having a really bad case of the flu. His head was spinning, and his body felt heavy. Did I survive those trucks? Is someone called Roland with me in here? Is this the hospital? He couldn't see well. His eyes felt just as heavy as his body. He forced them open. They took a while to focus. The blurry world started taking shape, and he saw an unfamiliar-looking wooden ceiling. That looked shabby. Am I in some kind of shed, or something? He finally saw the woman that was previously shouting. She looked like an older lady. Her body was somewhat wrinkled up. The thing that caught his eye the most was what she was wearing. Is that a maid uniform? She was wearing the whole shebang. A black dress, a white apron, and a cap of some sort that was holding her hair. He felt something cool be placed on his forehead, which was a damp cloth that this lady placed. From the looks of it, he was still alive, but ended up in someone's house instead of a hospital. The strange thing was that the lady looked kind of big. Was she over 2 meters tall or something? The bed he was in also seemed to be uncharacteristically large compared to his body. The problem wasn't with the furniture, or the old woman though. As he leaned down he noticed that his body looked a lot different than before. For one, he was a lot shorter. He felt really weak and couldn't move. The woman that looked like a Victorian maid tended to his sick body. Not long after, some kind of old man walked into the room. He looked to be some kind of physician, but for some reason he didn't even give him an examination. He just stared at him while holding onto a monocle. Wait, why is that monocle glowing? The man harumphed while turning to the maid that was standing in the corner, visible concern on her face. Why did you call me here? He is fine. His status is already recovering. Don't call me for trivial things. I need to tend to the other young masters. The old man shouted at the maid, as if she did something wrong. The old woman just bowed and took the verbal abuse. But the moment he left, her face looked a lot brighter. Thank the gods, young master. You had me worried sick. She smiled while replacing the damp wet cloth for a new one. She didn't stay there for long though, saying that he should sleep for now, and that she would be back in a couple of hours to check on him. After the coast was clear, and managed to raise his upper body. He looked at his hands. They were soft and small. His body looked thick and slightly malnourished, but that wasn't the main problem here. What is this? Did I become a kid? Everything in this room wasn't big, he just was small. He had turned into a child for some reason. Wait, am I really this Roland? What is this? What's going on? Who is this? Where is this? My status is recovering. While he was desperately clamoring for answers in his head, something happened. A screen popped up in front of his face. His eyes bulged wide as he started reading what was written there. This wasn't all. The moment the window popped up, he felt information rushing into his brain. It was as if thousands of needles poking his head. The information that he was receiving concerned the boy named Roland Arden that he was occupying the body of. So that's how it is. Name: Roland Arden. Strength: 4 agility, 5 dexterity, 15 vitality, 4 endurance, 4 intelligence, 35 willpower, 18 charisma, 6 luck, 5. Chapter 2: Stats, Skill, and even more stats. Roland kept looking at the status window. He was someone versed in computers, so he knew what those meant. Am I stuck in some kind of game world? Did someone put me into virtual reality? He pinched himself to see if he was feeling any pain, and to no surprise he did. Did I really die? Is this the afterlife? He was shocked. Not too long ago, he was tinkering in the computer repair shop, and now he woke up in a young boy's body. He even knew who this child was as he regained all of his memories, and what the child knew about this world. The place he was in was called the Kingdom of Caldras, and he was the 4th son from the House of Arden. His new father was a baron, and he was the youngest son, besides that he even had 2 sisters, one being younger than him. This kid, his family doesn't really think much of him, does it? He looked at the shabby room he was in. He knew from his memories that he wasn't really in contention for the noble title of this house. This honor belonged to the firstborn. Maybe the second-born still had a shot at it if he was especially talented, but he was only the 4th in line. Unless all of his brothers died, he had no chance. He wasn't sure what this boy's fate would be in the eyes of his family. He was too young to know how the political structure in this world worked. He only knew that he was the son of a noble, so it was probably still better than being a commoner. I should be safe here for the time. Not sure what the age of adulthood in this world is, but the bigger question is, he looked to the hovering window in front of his face. It looked like some kind of status screen of an RPG character. It had things like strength and endurance, just like in games that he used to play. Most of his stats were low, but some of them stood out. My intelligence is quite high, so is my willpower and dexterity. Aren't the first 2 mage stats? He needed more information first. He needed to figure this status screen out. This was something that the people living in this world saw as natural. The boy's memories reflected that as he could recall him using it. Okay, I need to think status, and it should show up. He strained his thoughts. The game-like screen appearing in front of him again. He could see all of his main stats. If he guided his gaze to the desired option, he could even get some flavor text to give him an explanation. Name: Explanation: Strength indicates the physical power of an individual, increases attack damage and stamina slightly. Agility indicates how agile and nimble a person is, increases speed, quickness, and stamina slightly. Dexterity indicates skill in performing tasks, especially with the hands, increases attack damage with finesse weapons and attack speed. Vitality increases health points, defense, physical resistances, and the lifespan of an individual. Endurance increases an individual's stamina regeneration, and health points slightly. Intelligence increases an individual's mana points, magic attack, and learning speed. Willpower increases an individual's resistance to elemental attacks, status effects, and mana points slightly. Charisma indicates an individual's charm, a measure of personality, persuasiveness, leadership. Luck increases the chance for critical attacks and other various skills related to chance. He started reading the short explanations for the attributes, and looked at his own to see what he was good and bad at. Most of his stats were quite low, but some were uncharacteristically high compared to the others. For one, his intelligence stat was really high at a whopping 35, followed by willpower at 18, and then dexterity at 15. Intelligence increases my mana and magic attack. Am I a mage or something? I'm resistant to status effect and good with my hands. Besides those 3, everything else was below 10. He had no idea how the stats of an average person's in this world looked like. He tried recalling something from the memories that he got from this child, but there was nothing concerning this. The boy left a boring life without anyone really telling him anything. This was due to how low his social standing was in this family. He was the lowly 4th son, and he wasn't even the child of the main wife, but came from a mistress that wasn't even allowed to live together with him at this estate. He tried recalling how the boy's mother looked, the face or even the shape, but he couldn't. Don't think he ever saw his mother. He tried thinking about what kind of world he was in now. There was a window in his room, but he was still feeling sickly. By the looks of the doctor, and the maid he was somewhere where the technological advancement wasn't that great. Great. How am I supposed to live without the internet now? He became dejected. All those shows and movies that he was eagerly waiting to devour in his free time were all gone now. What was he even supposed to do here? Go to school like a normal kid, and then become some kind of court official? Is that even an option? My status is fairly low, well, they'd just toss me out, or tell me to go join the army or something. He wasn't sure how things worked. From his internet knowledge he knew that noble sons sometimes became servants of higher nobles. Some were even forced to join the clergy to become a monk. Ugh, I don't want to shave my head, or be forced to take some vows. He moved his attention back to his status. Did it always look like this? He tried recalling the memories of the boy that had previously looked at his own attributes. I'm sure those 3 stats were lower, though his intelligence was above 10 from the start. He had somehow influenced these stats, but what was the reason? He decided to investigate and looked at his status screen again. It is that there is a skill menu. He willed the skill menu to open. With some mental gymnastics he managed to bring out the window. This one showed him all the skills and traits that he had. Name type description D. Bugger L5 passive skill allows the user to find and resolve defects. Bonus to intelligence +5. Logical thinker trait. A person with this trait thinks calmly, can analyze the problem, and come to a rational conclusion. Receives a bonus to intelligence +5 and willpower +5. Circuitry L6. Passive skill bonus to repair and creation of circuits or circuit equivalents. Bonus to dexterity +6 and +6 intelligence. Fast learning trait. People with this trait absorb knowledge at an increased rate. Bonus to intelligence +5. Knowledge retention trait. A person with this trait is able to retain more information and at a faster rate. Bonus to intelligence +3 and willpower +5. Sleep resistance L4 passive skill. You require less sleep and feel less tired. Tinkerer L5 passive skill. Increased proficiency in the creation and repair of various components. Bonus to dexterity 5. Identify L1 passive skill used for identifying and analyzing the world. Mana sense L1 passive skill allows you to sense mana. Roland's eyes went wide. He didn't expect to find so many various skills in there. He knew that most of those weren't in here before. This also explained why he had an increase in stats. Most of those passive skills and traits increase my intelligence, willpower, and dexterity. The traits and skills that were there before he got here were fast learning, knowledge retention, identify, and mana sense. He could also recall that this kid read a lot of books in his past time, though that probably had to do with the fact that there was nothing else for him to do besides that. Those nights I spend playing games must count for that sleep resistance passive. Okay, so why am I here? Did I overwrite this brat's brain, or did he die, and then my soul jumped in, or something? He tried recalling why the boy was sick. The moment he did, he got a slight headache. He recalled that the boy was trying to do something. He managed to see some kind of glowing mist in the air, and he tried to somehow absorb it into his body, and something went wrong and he got sick. Didn't that doctor say something about my status already recovering? He looked at his status screen again. The moment he thought about it, the window expanded and showed him a new part. Roland Arden, P40, 52, M, P4, 192, 4, 192, P35, 67 status effects. Sickness recovering. Sickness? Why are there question marks there? Do you need some kind of knowledge to see what it actually is? He squinted and concentrated on the question marks, but nothing changed. He did have some kind of identification skill, but maybe it wasn't high enough, being only at L1. Well, he got sick after that glowing mist entered his body. Does it have something to do with that mana sense skill? I sure have a huge amount of MP compared to everything else. This was a really odd situation to be in. He thought of what happened that night. 2 murder trucks turned him into a bloody pancake, and now he ended up in someplace with a game system. From the kid's memories, he was sure that he wasn't the only one with this system. Everyone had it with them since birth. The rest was unclear, as no one really explained much to this child. This was probably also why he suffered some kind of backlash from absorbing that glowing mist. While he was at it, he looked at his stats, and then compared the bonuses from the passive skills that he was receiving. Most of his intelligence came from his passives and traits. If he removed them all, then he would end up with 11. Still over 10, though. Is that even a lot for a 5-year-old? Still, with those 2 traits that he had, it would put his int at 19. Maybe his weak body couldn't handle the excess mana? He started doing some mathematics in his brain, trying to count how much his stats affected his MP. It didn't take him too long to figure out that he gained 10 MP for every 1 intelligence, and 4 MP for every point in willpower. The surprising thing came afterwards, as after he was done with his calculations. You have learned the basic mathematics skill. What? The sounds belonged to a woman, and she sounded quite gentle. He looked around to see if someone came into this room, but there was no one to be seen. So, I've gained a new skill. He checked the description, but it didn't say much besides it being an indicator that he knew mathematics. It didn't even increase his intelligence stat at all. Guess you don't get stat bonuses for every skill? He had no reference point. The boy's memories didn't answer many questions about these skills. The identify skill was something that apparently showed up after time passes. Maybe it was something everyone had? He really needed more information about his situation, but he was only a 5-year-old child that wasn't taken seriously around here. Maybe that maid will answer some questions? He thought back to the old lady that showed concern when tending to him. Her name was Martha, and from the looks of things, she was the only person that tended to the young boy's needs. He had a vivid image in his mind of the woman bringing him food, helping him put on clothes, or cleaning around the room that he spent the most time in. He remembered something. There was a certain book that the youth was reading before succumbing to the sickness. In the corner, there was a large desk with a chair. Some old cushions were placed there by the maid so that the boy didn't feel uncomfortable while reading. There was a pile of books there, and one, in particular, was the one he was interested in. "Think I feel better now. Should be able to move." He wasn't sure if it was due to his willpower stat that supposedly helped with status effects, but he was feeling better with each passing moment. He wiggled down his bed and moved over to the desk which had the book in question. The basics of magic. So, he started learning this, and something went wrong. That's harsh. He thought back to the poor child. He was more or less abandoned by his family. The doctor was too late to save him. He might have even been too lazy to bother by how he acted when he saw him recovering. He left the book on the desk and moved to the sole window that was right next to it. He peeked outside and noticed that there were some people there. They looked to be working the field. Some kind of plow was attached to a farm animal. Is that an ox? Why is it so big and why does it have 3 horns? He was clearly not on Earth anymore. The farmer there was using the large animal to help him plow the field. He could see other people walking around, even some in not so well-kept armor. While he was preoccupied with sneaking glances outside the window, the door opened up. Martha returned to check up on the boy. "Master Roland, you shouldn't be out of bed. Here, I brought you some porridge." The man in the child's body looked at the smiling woman. He wanted to speak up, but decided on just nodding and going back to bed. This will take some time getting used to. Chapter 3. Geography and Family. Roland looked up at the ceiling. It was the same shabby ceiling that was there yesterday. He gave out a sigh and looked around, his mood dropping even further. It wasn't a dream after all. Just to be sure, he thought about bringing up the status window. It appeared in a flash. That sickness status isn't there anymore. I guess I've made a full recovery. The man in the child's body strained his memory trying to recall what this kid normally did the whole day. Did he need to interact with his family? Did he have to act like a brat? Would they find out that someone else was inhabiting this body if he acted strangely? Were some questions that he was asking himself. He also thought back to yesterday, and to the woman named Martha. He tried probing her about the sickness. The woman didn't know anything about it, and the doctor didn't look into it either. Maybe I shouldn't have told her about that glowing mist? He muttered to himself. He felt that him telling the old maid what happened was not something that he would normally do. He was mostly mistrustful of others, not really sharing his feelings with just anyone. Are this kid's memories affecting me, or something? He knew the child's original owner was very fond of this woman. He remembered that she was the only person that was kind towards him. No one else from his so-called family bothered with him, and the other servants were also very cold. Don't think she will do anything drastic. He went back to thinking about his next step. He needed to find some way to fit into this strange game-like world and maybe find a way back to his old one. The thought of murder trucks chasing him was still bothering him. While getting up from his bed, he heard a knock on the door. His maid Martha walked in with some bread, water, and what looked to be meat. "Young master, you should still rest." She placed the food on a nearby table and moved towards the child, concern on her face. "I'm fine. The sickness status isn't even there anymore," he replied while not wanting to go back into that bed. He spent an entire day there just looking up at the ceiling and his status screen. He was bored out of his mind, and there were no such things like the internet in this world. What he needed is more information. He knew that this place had a library, and as the son of the Baron, he was allowed to go through it. From the child's memories, he knew that this was mostly what this kid did. Probably this was why his intelligence stat was so high. "Is that so, young master? Your father wants to see you later in the day. Keep that in mind. Let me help you get dressed first." That was a quick change in attitude. The mention of no status effects was enough to deem a person cured apparently. "He wants to see me? What was this about?" He racked his brain, and couldn't recall any recent memories where his father paid any attention to him. Could he be worried about Roland's health? But why now? Did he mention why? Martha placed her hand on his head, and patted his hair. She was also helping him put on some clothes. It looked like some kind of tunic and pants combo, quite plain looking. Probably just wants to see his youngest son. "Be happy, young master. You have a chance to meet your father." The maid sounded really happy that the Baron wanted to see him. It made it seem like it was some kind of big honor that he was even allowed to see that man. Is there some kind of etiquette for things like this? There is nothing in this kid's memories about these things. Finally Master decided this is your big chance, young master. The maid named Martha was quite happy. In her eyes this was a joyous occasion. Roland, on the other hand, was quite skittish. He feared that he might act out of line, and get himself in some kind of trouble with his so-called father. He won't order some kind of lashing if I act out of line, will he? The only thing about nobles that he knew was from history. They were rumored to be snotty and prone to violence, and took their reputation very seriously. While Roland's imagination was pushing him into a certain direction, he finished eating and getting dressed. The food was quite plain, just some white bread, water, and a large sausage which tasted funny. Martha, I want to go to the library. The books in his room weren't what he was looking for. He wanted to see where he was. He needed some history books or ones about geography. A map of where he was would be nice too. He wanted to know where he ended up. Besides knowing the name, he had no idea what this place was. The library? Think that's okay, but be sure not to spend too long. You have to remember the Lord's order. By the looks of it, this meeting couldn't be avoided. His maid would probably drag him there even if he refused. He finally left his room and could stretch his legs. He was on the top floor in a side wing of the Arden family mansion. He was someone that had spent his life living in small apartments and lofts, so this place felt huge. Think a baron is on the bottom of the noble ladder? I guess a noble is still a noble. He stepped outside. The door that led out of his room creaked as if he was in a haunted house. Thanks to the original Roland's memories, he knew exactly where the library was located. The boy was quite smart when it came to studying, but he felt like he had holes in his knowledge. The process that passed the memories of the original Roland wasn't perfect. He could see some servants here and there, but no one really paid any attention to him. He thought that as a young noble he would be greeted or receive a bow. This didn't happen. The people looked in his direction, but went on their way as if he wasn't there. I guess that's how an illegitimate son would be treated. He remembered that he was a bastard, someone that was born from a commoner that the baron had his way with. He still had no idea what his mother was up to, but he was sure that she wasn't in this mansion. They finally arrived at the library. The doors were large and old and screeched when he opened them up as well. Inside he saw shelves with various books. The place looked very old and was dusty. The servants didn't take care of it, as the baron focused more on practical things like swordsmanship. Ah yes, the only bookworm of the family. Martha left. This was a place that the young Roland visited frequently. Most of the time he just took some books that were interesting, like fables and tales about legendary heroes. No one bothered him here, and he didn't need to fear his older brothers, that didn't seem to like him all too much. Okay, I need to find some kind of map. Where am I, and how big is this country? He was short at about 105 cm, which was normal for a child his age. Due to this, he needed a chair if he wanted to reach the books that were placed on higher shelves. Why do they have this library, if no one even uses it? He rummaged through everything and managed to find some history and geography books. There was even a map with the names of the countries. The country I'm in was called the Kingdom of Caldres. The map was a bit dusty, and the ink was slightly faded, but it was readable. So I'm here. The map that he was able to procure wasn't a world map but just of the continent that he was on. This was enough to get a general idea. His country had 4 other countries around it, which wasn't good from a military standpoint. Hope those countries don't decide to invade us. He went through the books that he grabbed and soon found out the power of his fast learning and memory retention trait. He could remember most of what he had read on the previous page. His learning speed was astonishing. I could have used this back at the college days. Maybe I can become a scholar or a court official in this world, if they have anything like that. He was unsure of his future, but he would rather be a researcher than a knight. Damn, these history books are too vague. How old is this even? The books weren't helping that much without a reference point. He forgot to ask his maid about the era he was in. He didn't know what year it was either. The geography books were more helpful though. From them he found out that the kingdom that he was living in was fairly large. It was even larger than the largest country that he knew back on Earth, surface-wise. This is only a partial map. Is this the only continent? If not, then this planet could be a lot bigger than Earth. He continued with the reading and finally found the name of the world that he was now on, along with its size. The planet's name is Terra? Think I've heard that somewhere before. The size. This isn't the metric system anymore? Do I need to find a math book now? He had the world name, but the size was unknown to him. He shrugged as it didn't really matter, knowing that it was big was enough. While he was rummaging through the books, he heard the large door opening up. Martha stepped through them, probably here to remind him about the appointment with his father. Young master, it's time. The new Roland felt nervous for some reason. He had a hard time remembering the baron's face. The man didn't really visit him that often. The last time he saw him was on the boy's 4th birthday. On the 5th one, he didn't even receive a present from him. Just a quiet party with his maid that brought him some cake. This is going to be awkward. Do I need to call that guy father? Will he hit me if I annoy him? He was sure that he was the lowest ranked person from the whole family, and he remembered that his older brothers didn't take him seriously either. He had to do it though, so he followed after his maid that guided him to the dining room. Are we going to eat dinner together or something? He racked his brain. He couldn't remember the last time Roland was invited to dine with his family. He mostly spent his days alone in his room reading books and dreaming about fun and adventure like any young boy his age. His maid stopped before the door to the dining room. She smiled at him, but knew that she wasn't allowed to go any further. I will see you later, young master. He nodded and entered the room. Inside he saw a large table. Servants were bringing in food and drinks alike. Some of his brothers were already here, like the third son Robert. The youth was 8 years old, and the moment their eyes met he scoffed as if Roland wasn't supposed to be here. Robert, just as him, was someone that came from a commoner, but his mother was a mistress that was still living in this house. Thanks to this he still had a measure of respect. Roland just stood there for now, as he wasn't sure if he was allowed to take a seat before the Baron arrived. Edwin, the second son, and Rainer, the firstborn son, arrived soon afterward. Besides him, there was his older sister Sophia, and Diana, that was the younger one. That Baron sure likes to party. 6 kids already, might be more on the way. Edwin and Rainer were sons from the main wife along with Sophia, the first daughter. Diana along with Robert came from the second wife, the mistress. From Roland's reasoning, the first wife probably got older, and the Baron switched to the younger version, while making more kids along the way. I see being a noble has its perks. Roland wasn't someone who was very experienced with women. He had a fling with 2 back in his college days, but after he started working he had a long dry spell. The Baron and his wives arrived soon afterward, Tabitha, the first wife, and Francine, the second one, and the mistress. The Baron looked to be a big man. He had a nice gentleman-like mustache, and a large scar running down from his left eyebrow all the way to his lip. He exuded a certain aura of a warrior. The noble clothes that he was wearing couldn't hide all the muscles underneath all too well. Damn, my dad is Jack. Everyone waited for the Baron to arrive. He sat at center stage, and then one by one, starting from the main wife, everyone sat down. Roland was sure to follow everyone's example and sit the furthest back right next to the third son. He could see the snarky tear rolled glaring at him the moment he did that. "What are you staring at, you little shit?" was the thing he wanted to shout out, but he remained quiet. Would be best if he didn't have to talk with anyone in here. The Baron was quiet, and everyone just waited for him to start eating. The food on the table didn't taste all that great. The cuisine on Earth was a lot better compared to this bland meat they were having. "Rainer, how is your sword training going?" the Baron asked. "My basic sword mastery is already at level 6, father." The Baron started asking his kids about skills and the progress in their training. Apparently they were training and unlocking skills. They even mentioned the warrior class and something about it being tier 1. He wasn't sure what this meant, as he himself didn't have anything like a class. While he was digesting the new information and trying not to stand out, he heard his father call out to him. "Roland." He flinched and looked up. Everyone was looking at him for some reason. It was more a look of surprise, some of his family members almost having forgotten that they had a 5-year-old sibling. "Doctor said that you contacted the mana sickness. Also you saw some glowing mist. Is that right?" "Glowing mist? Did Martha rat me out?" Why, yes, father." He tried imitating his older brothers but stuttered slightly. Thankfully the buff-looking man didn't seem to mind it that much. "Mana sickness? Do you perhaps have a mana-related skill?" His father looked at him. Everyone else did the same as they waited for a reply. "Why, yes, I have the mana sense skill." "What?" the oldest brother shouted out while looking at Roland, his eyes squinting. "What you staring at me like that for? I'm just answering the questions here." "Oh, mana sense, you're not lying to me, are you?" The Baron gave Roland an intense stare. The boy shrunk down as he felt as if he was getting rocks piled up on him. "No, I have it." He spoke out in a meek voice while the Baron rubbed his chin. "Is that so, Adam?" He could see the other kids, and even the wives, looking at him. It was as if he was doing something out of line, but they were afraid to speak up while the Baron was talking. A man with gray hair stepped out. He was wearing a black tux. "If the boy has the mana sense skill, we need to check. Bring someone who can perform a test. If he passes, look into procuring a tutor and some books related to magic." Roland looked at the large man that was asking the butler-looking fellow for some test. Was he about to get a magic teacher? Was it going to be that easy? He expected to have to scrape by being unnoticed, but here he was getting some preferential treatment out of nowhere. Was mana sense some rare skill? He could tell that his siblings weren't happy with this. Their expressions were easy to read, as they were kids that weren't able to hide their emotions. Roland, on the other hand, was all smiles, just nodding while his Baron of a father continued to talk. Maybe I'm some kind of genius? Am I a wizard now?" Chapter 4. Making some progress. This was unexpected. It was as if he played the reverse card and flipped his social status around. The next day a person came to check upon him. His father stood true to his word and brought someone over to test if he had talent in magic. It was apparently one of the more rare gifts in this world. Roland thought that they might try reading his status screen in some way. That would in turn reveal his circuit and bugging-related skills. Luckily, you had to have an evolved version of the identifying skill to be actually able to that. This cost a lot, so his father opted out for a lesser measuring item in the shape of an orb. It tested someone's aptitude in some way, and gave out a faint blue glow which indicated that Roland did indeed have the mentioned mana sense skill. His life got flipped, turned upside down. He was suddenly accepted into the family inner circle together with the other kids. His living quarters were moved, and even the servants were bowing at him now. The same couldn't be said for the other sons though. They all saw him as an eyesore. They were quite competitive and prideful. Still, he was the only one from the family with this so-called talent. This meant more work though. He received many new books on how to train his skills. He didn't get a tutor for one reason or the other, but he suspected that even with this, he was still considered only slightly more useful. He was aware that he could lose his newfound standing quite fast if he slacked off. Man, this world is harsh. The only thing I'm doing is studying and then training. This is worse than staying overtime for work. This is slave labor. His day consisted mostly of reading books and training his mana skill to a higher level. He received bonuses to his intelligence, and they told him that he needed to max it out before his ascension ritual. What was an ascension ritual, you might ask? It was something that happened when a child reached the age of 10. From what he knew, he would be given something called an ascension stone. After his 10th birthday, it would finally be usable and reward him with his first class. Apparently, it was quite strange. The person using it would be brought to some strange location where this ritual took place. From what it said in the books, the rituals might differ depending on the individuals, but he would receive the first class automatically without being able to choose it himself. That's why it was important to train the skills that were required for Tier 1 class you wanted. Yes, classes came in tiers. The most basic Tier 1 classes that existed were Warrior, Archer, Mage, Thief, Blacksmith, and Acolyte. There were of course more, but these were the most common ones that most of the people received. They were mostly separated into combat classes and production classes, then further into more specialized categories like support classes. This wasn't the end though. Those ascension stones could be bought and used repeatedly, each time you would be taken to that strange place. Though apparently after the first freebie you would need to go through a trial. Depending on your stats and skills you could unlock other classes. The requirements for unlocking Tier 2 classes varied. The minimum requirement was maxing out at least one Tier 1 class. The Mage class relied on intelligence and willpower to cast spells. Int for better attack and more mana, while willpower apparently allowed for better concentration during spellcasting and increased mana regeneration. The basic books he was learning from didn't go into too much detail, and his family wouldn't be spending more cash on him until after his ascension ritual. Still, I'm going to be a damn mage. Why should the next mage king do this kind shit? Roland grumbled while doing push-ups. An angry-looking man was looking at him. This was a soldier that was working for the Baron and his personal trainer. The Baron, whose name was Wentworth Arden, was a muscle head through and through. What kind of name is Wentworth? His father was a military man as well, so he wanted all of his children to have basic training. This mostly consisted of endurance and muscle building training along with basic swordsmanship. His life consisted of waking up, eating, training in the morning, then reading books, and training his mana. This was one of these days. He was doing some basic strength training like push-ups, squats, and then pull-ups. His regiment consisted of bodyweight exercises as he was still only a 5-year-old. His older brother, that was 8, was running some laps and smirking in his direction. "What are you looking at, you brat? When I get that mage class, I'll stick a lightning bolt up your ass." Roland panted while face-planting into the dusty ground. His physical stats were abysmal. This was probably why his magic-related stats were so good. His male siblings for some reason loved seeing him get mistreated. He didn't know why, but he attributed it to them being spoiled noble brats. They probably saw him as someone beneath him. After he gained some clout with the Baron, they resented him even more. "Okay, the moment I get the chance, I'm running away from this devil hole," he groaned while the man that was training him gave him a nudge with his foot. "That wasn't even 10, get up. This is a disgrace to the Arden name." He was constantly reminded that he was part of the noble caste now. He was supposed to be part of the fabled 1% now. It sure didn't feel like that though. His living conditions improved slightly, but if he had to compare it to how people live back on Earth, it was worse here. Still, he was gaining new skills. After some running, he got the running skill. If he did some sprints, he received the sprint skill. After doing some basic hand-to-hand combat drills, he received basic punching skills. This made the whole progression more bearable as you had something to look forward to. He was a gamer back in his older life, so this gave his dopamine receptors a nudge, which in turn made him want to increase those basic physical skills. What more, the higher the skills the better he became. The moment he received one, he instantly felt the change. He could run faster, jump higher, and punch harder. He would even receive bonuses to his endurance and strength stats if he leveled up these skills high enough. "This is slightly addicting," he said while looking up in the air. He was sitting on his bed and looking at the glowing fog around him. His mana sense skill was already at level 3 at this point. This skill didn't do much besides letting him see the mana around him. It looked like a faint blue fog, but he couldn't really do anything with it. Leveling this skill only widened the range of his mana sense, and made the fog slightly more distinct. Well, from the books I read, I should get this to level 10 before the Ascension ceremony, and I'm almost guaranteed a mage class. I will gain some skills directly from the mage class L1, ones that will help me shape mana and expel mana, or ones that will let me absorb more and raise my mana regeneration. He balanced a pen between his nose and upper lip and looked outside. There were 2 moons shining brightly. One was red, and the other was blue. This was a reminder that he was really in another world. His family was gone, all of his old friends too. Everyone here felt like a stranger. He didn't feel like he could bond with them either. His so-called parent was distant. He only gave him attention the moment he found out that he had a rare skill. He knew people like that back from Earth, the ones that only stay with you till you are useful to them. When your usefulness runs out, they will drop you like a sack of potatoes. I really need to get out of here. This mage thing is supposedly very prestigious, so, if all goes right, I will be able to pave my own path. He wanted nothing more than to leave in peace. He was starting to hate being caught up with others. He just wanted to be left in peace and do things at his own pace. Wonder what a mage actually does for a living. Will I have to participate in monster subjugations or wars? He tried thinking back to a couple of RPGs he used to play. In most of those, some kind of chosen one set off on a quest with a party of adventurers. The most basic one was the one where you defeated some powerful monster like a demon king. Me a hero, huh? That probably won't happen. He gave out a sigh and dropped the pen. He was tired and bruised. The idiot of a drill instructor had given him a couple of good whacks with a stick when he was taking his time while running. Oh, will I need to do this for the next 5 years? He grumbled while fading away into dreamland, a life of peace and laziness on his mind. A dark-haired boy with green eyes was standing by a big tree. He was wearing casual clothes and his face was dirty. The youth took a large breath in, and then tossed himself onto the broad tree trunk. His hands and feet started shuffling back and forth as he headed upwards as he climbed the tree. In a matter of seconds, he managed to get up to one of the larger branches. He wasn't done apparently, as he quickly slid down and repeated this procedure about 10 times before he heard a familiar voice. Basic climbing level 3 reached. This was a slightly older Roland. Half a year had passed since he got here. He had been testing the skill and level-based system for some time now and came to some conclusions. From what he knew, a person couldn't get many skills before going through the Ascension ritual. A vast majority of them were the basic type. 50 times, huh? I guess it's not a 10-I multiplier. Olin rubbed his chin. He had trained his climbing tree on this exact same tree from level 1. After getting up the first time, he had earned basic climbing at L1. After the next 10 tries, he was at L2. Then after 50 times he got it up to level 3 now. Not everything can become a skill, though. He had tried various approaches. He had a small ball, and he tried tossing it up against the wall multiple times to see if he would gain some kind of throwing skill, but it didn't work. Then he gave it another try with a rock and a training dummy, and was able to attain a basic rock throwing skill. Might have something to do with the way I was throwing it, or with the item being a toy and a rock might be considered a projectile or a weapon. He came to the conclusion that most of the skills you could gain were used for combat in some way. He needed to throw a spear to get a basic spear throwing skill, but for some reason couldn't achieve the same by throwing a stick that wasn't accepted by the system as a weapon. It's a little bit vague. Also think there is a clear achievement-based system working in the back that levels the skills up when you pass the threshold. He had tested the climbing skill just for that reason. The level up points was at 1, 10, and then 50. The further you went, the harder it was to level up a skill. Wonder if I climb a taller tree, if the time required to level up this skill will change. Martha was standing to the side while holding her cheek. She had been watching her young master climbing up various trees and scribbling something down into a notebook. At some point, he would stop and look at the things he wrote down. His eyes would narrow or bulge out in an odd way. Young master has become quite active lately. I should add more meat to his diet. The woman went away to do some chores while Roland continued testing the skills. He had become quite infamous among the servants. People started finding him hiding in the closets or sneaking into the basement. When they asked him about an explanation, he always replied that he was testing new skills. His older brothers started ignoring him after they saw him try to scale the mansion walls, while muttering something about a strange monster called a truck. More time passed and Roland had learned most of the basic skills that he considered useful and easy to pick up. There was one thing that was bothering him, and that were the skills that he was sent to this world with. Even after testing, he couldn't figure out what his circuitry or debugging skills could be useful for. The third one that was tinkering proved useful when he tried rearranging a clock. He never worked with clocks, but he somehow knew where the parts should fit in. He didn't believe this was the work of the circuitry skill, as circuits and cogs in a clock weren't even close. The application of mana sense was also something he couldn't figure out. There was also that thing where the original host of the body died due to trying to absorb the mana fog in the surrounding. After further research, he concluded that before reaching a mage or acolyte class this was impossible and would result in mana poisoning. No one explained it to the original kid. I guess I'll have to wait with any magic-related testing after I'm older. Roland wanted to start playing with mana. Who wouldn't? This path was blocked, for now, so he focused on other things. His identify skill went up the more he read or identified things. The sleep resistance was also self-explanatory. After the youth had gained a plethora of basic skills like sprinting, climbing, throwing, he looked into other things. One of these things was class-related skills concerning crafting. He had the tinkering skill, so maybe he could learn to smith or work the forge. Why, young master, if the Baron finds out you can't learn class skills like this, the Baron will be mad. Roland was now standing with a mallet in his hand, hitting it against some heated-up iron. He had gone over to the blacksmith that was working, and used his name of one of the Baron's sons to force the blacksmith to teach him something about crafting. This didn't go the way he had planned, though, as he wasn't getting any skills from hitting the heated-up horseshoes. Maybe I'm missing a step? Hey, what's the most basic blacksmith skill? He was sure he would gain some basic skills if he worked with the smelter or if he hammered away at heated metal. For some reason he wasn't getting anything at all. All the other basic skills were a lot easier to unlock at L1. Master Roland, if you don't unlock the blacksmith class you can't learn any smithing skills. Apparently, the only skills he could gain, just like before, were ones related to combat. The only hammer-related skills he could get were ones related to fighting proficiencies. This doesn't make much sense. Maybe the people or gods that developed this didn't want to have child labor or something? In the end, the Baron found out that Roland was spending his time working at the forge. He was forced to abandon his smithing testing after they proved ineffective. He was also forbidden from doing tasks like this, as they were unfitting of a noble's son. Time moved on. Roland kept training his basic skills to their maximum, while trying not to die from boredom. Doing repeatable tasks like this just to hear the system ding wasn't as rewarding as one might think. When his 9th birthday came, he didn't receive any presents though. He got something else entirely. Roland looked at the sharp object in his hand. It was a short sword fashioned out of steel. He was about 140 cms now, quite tall for a 9-year-old child. He glanced at the weapon he was holding, his identifying skill even giving him some basics. Short sword, common attack, defense. A common sword made from steel. Yeah, that helps a lot. Why was he holding a weapon for killing people, you might ask? Also, why was he in a dim-lit room with a green-looking creature looking at him with those beady eyes? The Baron liked to keep his boys on a tight leash. He was just 1 year short of receiving his ascension. The House of Arden had a tradition, a very bloody one. Children that reached the age of 9 were to take a certain test of bravery. He was taken to the mansion's dungeon, and there he was presented his opponent. This was something commonly seen in these kinds of fantasy worlds, but for Roland, this was a first. People around here were all humans. If he didn't see this creature today, he might have believed that they were the only race around. Goblin L1 1 117 there it was, green and ugly, and even shorter than him at about 120 cm height. It looked angry and was holding a short blade similar to his, just a lot rustier. In comparison, after 4 years of grueling training, his stats went up by a bit. Name: Roland Arden, P1, 159 159 and P4, 194 194 SP2, 105 105 Strength 12, Agility 13, Dexterity 20, Vitality 12, Endurance 13, Intelligence 41, Willpower 21, Charisma 9, Luck 6. He only had his P to compare. His was higher, so he had to have higher Vitality and Endurance than this creature. Vitality gave most health points, while Endurance was mostly for stamina, but also rewarded some points to it. Roland, what are you looking at? Focus on your enemy. The voice came from the side. It was the same man that was responsible for his training. He was large and bald, scars all over his body. The Baron was busy this day, but decided that it shouldn't be postponed, so he was here without his parent. In his mind, this was a trivial matter, and just like the other sons, he should be able to push through this little test. Wish that ridiculous int stat that I have could be used for something. He had 3 stats over 20. Dexterity was the only one that was helpful for this occasion, but it was mostly archery focused, or for light blades like a rapier. The creature in front of him gave out a high-pitched screech and charged at him without waiting for him to get comfortable. It knew that this was a life or death encounter, and it would show no mercy to its opponent. Roland was startled by the shout, but luckily his high willpower let him keep a mostly clear head in this bout. Get a grip, you trained for this. The man inhabiting the youth's body would be a bit over 30 years of age at this point. Still, he was never in a death battle before, so he was quite nervous. There was no strategy to the way this monster acted. It just charged at him with its weapon in hand. It delivered an overhead chop that could be easily read, prompting Roland to dodge to the side. This was a good chance to retaliate. He swung his short sword at the creature, but faltered at the last second. He didn't put all of his weight into it. This resulted in a shallow cut to the goblin's arm. The monster swung back randomly, managing to deliver a cut to the boy's side. "You have taken 10 damage. What are you doing? Go for the throat." Roland backed away, sweat running down his forehead. Luckily he was wearing some leather armor that managed to protect him from the brunt of the attack. The bladed weapon of the green monster was of lower quality, so thanks to this, he was spared from bleeding. Still, it hurt and would probably leave behind a nasty bruise. His own attack was quite shallow as well, resulting in a similar 10 HP decrease to the goblin's health pool. The wound wasn't deep enough to cause a bleeding effect to go through, and the goblin screamed out again while charging. The creature seemed to go into some kind of berserk state. Its eyes went red, and it started swinging its blade around like a maniac. In the face of danger, Roland's mind went blank momentarily, and he started backing away. "What are you doing? It's only a small goblin." The man kept insulting him. He wanted to go over there and give him a slap. He might have been an adult on the inside, but this man thought he was a 9-year-old child. He was still shouting and edging him to face the monster head on. "Should have given me a shield, you prick." The egging worked. Roland gritted his teeth and dived forward. His opponent was weaker, had no training, and was slower. Between the randomness, Roland saw his chance and jabbed his short sword into the creature's shoulder, jumping back the moment it tried to hit back. This was a massive hit, as the goblin's HP dropped by 50 points, and it only had half of its health left. The monster screamed out, but this time around Roland was unaffected. The monster didn't relent and continued charging like an idiot. He took his time and just kept countering, finally ending it with a killing blow to the monster's neck. It dropped almost instantly. Black blood gushed out of its body. "You have gained 10 experience points. You have gained the first kill achievement. You receive a bonus of 50 experience points." He felt a strange tingling feeling like something wanted to enter his body. The strange phenomenon stopped almost instantly, as if being blocked by something. This feeling was the act of gaining experience, which was blocked due to this world's restrictions. This experience couldn't actually be used for now, as he needed an actual class. Any experience gained before the Ascension ritual would be added later on, but with a penalty. From the books, people speculated that this was put in place to prevent people from having kids kill monsters before the Ascension. Roland looked down. The stench this monster was giving off was making him nauseous. He managed to power through it, and not vomit. His only reward for killing this monster was smack to the back of his head. His so-called teacher berated him for doing badly, and not being able to just overpower a weak level 1 goblin that had no skill at fighting. Roland was far too tired to respond to this and just nodded. His 9th birthday ended with a blast, with him killing a humanoid creature followed by some nightmares. More time passed and finally, the day was close, the day of becoming a mighty mage. Chapter 5, Ascension Ritual. Roland was sitting in his room. Tomorrow the Ascension Ritual was supposed to take place. It might be called that, but it wasn't anything that grand. He would be given an orb, and it would supposedly somehow bring him to another place. In this place, he was going to receive his new class. Everyone said that the Ascension space differs for each individual. Roland had gone through books and procured as much information as he could. Supposedly the first time you used this class-changing crystal or orb, you got awarded a class. It was more or less a freebie. The fun part began afterward. The next time you used it, you had to go through some kind of trial. These trials ranged from your normal battle scenarios all the way to crafting items and solving puzzles. Some people said that they find themselves in a cave with many doors. The classes that they can use are behind those doors. Roland was holding onto a book that was related to classes and how you unlocked higher tiers. His tier 1 class of choice was the mage. If what the book said was true, then he was certain to get this one. My mana sense is maxed out, and I have truckloads of intelligence and willpower, so there isn't really any other class that fits me. I am not religious enough for the Acolyte class either. The other caster class that he had the stats for was the Acolyte. From this one you could advance into a tier 2 priest. This was your general healing class, but unless you were some kind of believer, you wouldn't get a chance at it. It says that you can sign up to the church, and after you go through their baptism you can also attain this class. The boy that was close to 10 rubbed his chin. Through the 5 years he had been here, he had grown a habit of talking to himself. Besides his maid Martha, and a cheeky brat, no one really talked to him. Even when they did, it was more yes or no type of answers or questions. Soon I will be able to leave this place. He was a noble, and even though his family was like this, they still had to take care of him. Nobles, after going through their ascension, would start attending school. There were separate schools for young mages and knights, so he would be free of his family. He even read that mages get special privileges. If he did well, he could earn himself his own plot of land free of charge. Free real estate, though I still have to pay taxes. The closer the day of freedom was, the more he read about the classes. Elemental mages, gravity mages, ones that could turn into massive demons or beasts. There were various kinds and you could pick and choose out of the pile if you earned the required skills. The most basic Tier 2 classes were the 4 basic elemental mages: fire, wind, earth, and water. There were some hidden ones or harder to reach, but these 4 were considered the basic 4. If you mastered all 4 of them, you could even earn a prestigious Tier 3 elementalist class, which was one of the better ones. There are so many possibilities. His eyes gleamed. He could wait to embark on his journey. There was no limit to how many classes you could have. The only thing that limited you was that you couldn't reclass before reaching at least 25 levels of the class you were in. Tier 1 classes had to be done till the end, as they had a level limit of 25. An element Holly sounds nice, but the other height elemental mage classes aren't bad either. A fire, frost mage is a strange one as it combines 2 opposite effects. He glanced at the other classes as well. You could even combine them together. Things like magic, swordsman or elemental knight were also possible, but were quite hard to achieve. People that wanted these classes had to be both good in physical attributes, as well as the magical ones. Being a mage opens up so many possibilities. You can mix magic with a lot of classes. You can even be an enchanter or a magic smith. Though there aren't that many of those, most mages wouldn't want to work as a blacksmith. Well, not like I have to worry about that too much. Making magical horseshoes isn't the way for me. While he was going through the class book once more, he heard a knock on the door. "Young master, it's getting late. You should go to sleep before the big day tomorrow." It was Martha, coming over to remind Roland of tomorrow's ascension ritual. "Ah, sure. Good night, Martha." The next day it was raining, and the clouds were blocking out the sun. This didn't bother Roland though. He was pumped up. He would be getting a game-like class, and nothing could break his spirit. The fact that Adam the butler was the one bringing over the ascension ritual crystal didn't shake him in any way. "Young master, your father is out and your brothers are busy at the night academy. Please take this." He handed him the crystal. It looked like a slightly blue quartz crystal, and was quite symmetrical. "Ah, sure, busy as always. What else is new?" The Baron was a busy man. He rarely spent time in his mansion. He was a high-ranking official in the army, and had to train the army soldiers. He had earned his rank thanks to his battle achievements. His whole family before him were honorable knights, but he was the first one to hit it big. "Yes, let us begin. Please sit down and concentrate on the crystal. You don't need to do anything else, Master Roland." No special place was required. Even though the crystal would take him somewhere, his real body would remain in place. If what the book said was true, then even if he stayed in the trial space for months, only seconds would go by in the material world. People speculated that some kind of powerful magic pulled the crystal user's soul somewhere, where time and space work differently. Roland nodded and sat down while holding the crystal with both his hands. Some other servants along with Martha were in the room with him. They were mostly here to examine if he actually received the mage class and pass it on to the family head. He read it in the book, and it said that there was nothing special to activating this crystal. He focused on it, and soon enough, he felt a strange reaction. The crystal started glowing brighter and brighter, and he felt as if he was getting drawn to it. In a matter of moments, everything went dark. He felt like someone had ripped him out of the spot he was sitting on and tossed him down a bottomless pit in which he was now falling down. What? The momentary darkness subsided, and he found himself in some kind of building. There were stairs leading upwards, and there were glass doors behind him. He glanced around. His eyes bulged out wide as he recognized this place. "Huh? I'm back. Was that all a dream or something? No, I'm still a 10-year-old. This was the cheap apartment building that he used to live in before he got flattened by that truck. It looked dirty and unkempt as always. He turned around but saw that something was off. Behind the glass doors that normally lead outside there was nothing. Why is it so dark outside? Can't see anything. It was pitch dark as if there was nothing there. He reached for the door handle and tried pushing it down. It didn't budge an inch. He pushed and pulled but nothing happened. He even started kicking the glass hoping to get some kind of reaction, but it was as if he was hitting hard steel. He finally turned around, his face filled with confusion and sweat. He went for the first apartment, knocking and trying to frantically open it. "Hey, is there someone inside? Hello?" The door was strange. It was as if it was made from a different material, and was photocopied from his memories, and just plastered here. The same thing happened when he ran up. Each door was unmoving. He couldn't even get the handles to budge in any way. That book said that this ascension space could be strange. I guess this isn't my old apartment building. He climbed up, finally realizing where he was. His old apartment was on the top floor. He remembered always getting winded while going up. This time around, with the increased stats and stamina, he felt normal. Stood in front of his apartment now, the number 19 written on it. Well, here goes nothing. He grabbed the door handle and flicked his wrist. The familiar clicking sound of a lock opening was heard. He pushed the door open and just looked inside. It's really my room. He slowly entered his old home. It wasn't big or anything. There was a living room and a small toilet. The kitchen was combined with the living area, and he only had enough space for a bed on the side along with a desk for his PC. Ah, this good old shitty apartment. The items in this place were all real and fully recreated. The mattress that he used to use even had a hole in exactly the same spot that he remembered. He sat down on his old bed, and even this old thing was better than the bed he was using back at the Arden estate. When he asked about a change, they just said something that had built character if he used a hard bed, and that he shouldn't complain. So what is this place supposed to be anyway? The windows couldn't be opened, and the water in the faucets wasn't running either. There was sufficient light inside this room, but the scenery outside was pitch black. This made him feel like he was in some kind of Twilight Zone episode. The only thing that was showing some life was his old gaming PC, as he noticed that the power button was glowing. He sat down in his old gaming chair. It was still comfy as ever. He pressed the button with a shaky finger, and heard the familiar booting sound. The computer booted up into Windows 10, and even his old password worked. The only thing out of place was the blank desktop, with only one icon right in the middle. I guess I'm supposed to click this. The icon was a drawing of a large shield in the back, and a sword and magic staff in the front. He slowly delivered the double click, and waited for this program to load up. He was greeted with a sprite of himself, or at least it looked kind of like him as the resolution was quite low. Is this pixel art of me, or something? There was an arrow moving away from his sprite that was looping a 3-frame walking animation to the side. There was another grayed out sprite that the arrow was pointing at. It looked like a pixel version of him in a robe. Could this be my Tier 1 class? Looks like a magician. He was kind of baffled about the way this ascension trial worked. Before clicking the mage sprite, he looked back and glanced at his old apartment room. He lived here for only a year, but he was closer to this place than to that noble mansion he was at now. He wanted to just turn around and flop on his bed. Maybe if he woke up he would be back on Earth and could go back to his boring job. I probably should get on with this ascension. He grimaced and placed his hand on the mouse. The cursor went over to the tiny sprite, and he clicked it. The moment he did that, he received a prompt. You wish to change classes to the Tier 1 mage class? Yes or no? He hesitated for a while, but finally clicked yes. The computer screen flashed for a moment, and a little animation of the arrow filling up as an upload screen appeared. The tutorial will be initiated. Please put on the VR headset. He received another prompt followed by a strange sound coming from above. Then a VR headset appeared out of nowhere and fell right into his lap. I never owned a VR headset. He looked at it, and it was a model he was familiar with. He wanted to buy one of these in the past, but didn't have the cash to spare. He decided to follow the instructions and put it on. The moment the VR headset was strapped in, something happened. He expected to actually see some instructions while getting a regular VR experience, but instead he found himself in a strange white room. There is nothing here. He couldn't feel that he was wearing a VR headset anymore and couldn't take it off. It was as if he dived into the Matrix. He looked around while wondering what he was supposed to do. After some seconds the whole place flickered, and the scenery changed. Wait, is that me? The white room switched to a grassy plain. There was a wooden training dummy standing in one spot, and opposite it was a person. This person looked like Roland. He was wearing a mage robe, and his facial expression was non-existent. His copy raised his hand upwards and held his palm towards the training dummy. Roland had his mana sense skill maxed out, so he noticed the change in mana around the person. The Roland clone opened up his mouth. Some words escaped its mouth. He stared at the talking person, and he noticed the shift of mana around the clone. The mana moved through its body and towards its palm, and something started forming. A small ball of energy was created. This ball gradually increased in size before it was shot forward. The wooden dummy received the hit, the wood splintering to the sides, as if it was hit by a small cannonball. Whoa, was that magic? His copy didn't say anything but dropped its hand down, and then turned to face him. The Roland copy had a blank expression, and then started slowly walking towards him. This put the original Roland at attention. What was this clone of him trying to do? Wait, he tried backing off, but his back hit some kind of invisible wall. Out of surprise he turned around, and tried hitting it with his fist. His sudden opponent didn't stop though and continued walking. Hey, you think I'm afraid of you? Roland took a fighting stance. He went through 5 years of training and knew basic hand-to-hand combat as well. He decided to take the offensive, thinking that his opponent wouldn't have enough time to react. But his punch didn't hit anything but air. It literally went through his copy's head. What is this? The clone was apparently immaterial, or a hologram. The moment it touched Roland's body it faded away. This wasn't the end, as Roland felt a sharp pain. His head felt like it was getting a needle stuck into it. You have attained the Tier 1 Mage class. Basic Mana Shaping skill unlocked. Basic Mana Regulation skill unlocked. Mana Bolt spell L1 unlocked. Basic Incantation L1 unlocked. He heard the familiar voice announce that he had changed classes while the pain was subsiding. He shook his head and could feel that he had learned an actual spell and had his stats slightly raised. The skills he gained helped him in shaping spells and regulating the mana inside of his body. He wanted to test his newfound skills out, but before he could do that the space he was in started flickering. He wasn't sure if it was due to a time limit or if after a class up you got kicked out. Everything went dark once more and he found himself falling into the darkness again. He gasped out as he found himself back in the Arden estate, the servants looking at him from the sides. "Were you successful, Master Roland? Did you receive the mage class?" He grasped his head for a moment. The crystal that he was holding previously had turned into dust. He nodded while rubbing his head and slowly moved off the ground. "Yes, I even learned the mana bolt spell." He smirked as he had achieved what he had set out to. No one in this family could deny him anymore. He could go to a prestigious academy and learn magic now. His life looked bright, and if he studied hard he could go far. "Congratulations, Master, but let us test your elemental affinities before we inform the Lord." Roland snapped out of his daydream and looked at Adam the butler. "Ah yes, the elemental affinities, I forgot to check them." The servant moved over with a large glass orb. Roland placed his hand on the measuring device, not thinking anything of it. His affinities would decide what elements he was best at. This was nothing more than a formality, but would show him which element he should focus on. He didn't need much. Any kind of number would let him advance further, so he wasn't worried. The orb glowed slightly, but nothing out of the ordinary happened. The butler looked at the measuring device for a moment with a strange expression on his face. Could it be broken? "Young Master, could you look at your elemental affinities and see the values?" The elemental affinities were a hidden stat that was only unlocked after the first class. Roland shrugged and brought up his status screen. While thinking about his affinity, a window popped up. At Tier 1 only the basic 4 elements could be unlocked. There were more elements like lightning and gravity at higher tiers. Name: Roland Ardenfire. 0% wind, 0% earth, 0% water, 0% what, all at 0%. He spoke out clearly and everyone heard it. Adam looked at the orb, and then to Roland, his brows furrowing. 0%. This is unprecedented. I must report this to the Lord. The other servants started whispering from the sides. He wasn't sure what was wrong. The books didn't say anything about people having 0 elemental affinity. He looked at his maid Martha. The woman had tears in her eyes for some reason. "He has no magic affinity. Doesn't that mean that he won't be able to get any of the Tier 2 mage classes?" one of the servants said while another one tried to shut him up. "But I have no magic talent. How could this be?" Chapter 6. Change of plans. Roland returned to his room. It was still raining outside, and the thunderstorm wasn't letting up. The time spent in the ascension space felt like seconds to the people outside, so not much time had passed. Martha had accompanied Roland to his room after the reveal that his elemental affinities were low. She brought over some tea and decided to let the boy cool off for now. "If you need anything, just call me, young master. The Baron will be returning to the mansion tomorrow." Roland just nodded while being quiet. After he heard the door closing behind his maid, he flopped on his bed like a dead fish. "What is this shit? What am I supposed to do now?" He hit the bed with his 10-year-old fists while gritting his teeth. After a bout of rage, he jumped right up and ran up to his desk. "Where is that book?" He started flinging the books left and right and managed to find the one that explained the elemental affinities in more detail. 0% on all of the affinities. This means. He already knew the answer. He had gone through these books multiple times. Still, he needed to check one more time. He started reading, his eyes going through the information while his brain digested it with astonishing speed. Ugh! He threw the book he was reading to the side and sat down at his desk, his head moving backward as he looked at the ceiling. To change your class to any of the element mages, you need to unlock an elemental affinity skill. You can't unlock it if your connection to the elements is non-existent. If you wanted to progress further in your life as a mage, this was a requirement. He could not go any further. Getting that skill required his affinity to at least be at 1%. This was a rare case, a 1 in a million occurrence. People like him were considered inept at becoming a mage and mostly strayed away from that path. He was a special case though. All of his stats made everyone think that he would be a talented mage. He had learned the mana sense skill at a young age and his intelligence was off the charts. In the book it said that most mages had an intelligence stat at 20 when they started out. He, on the other hand, had more than double of that. There was no reason to believe that he could be anything other than a mage. Something is playing a stupid joke on me. I can't even swap this class till I get to level 25. He decided to glance at his status screen. He had even leveled up to the 3rd level of mage, due to the buildup of his experience. After the 9th birthday, his father arranged a goblin fight. Just as the first time, he would fight a 1-on-1 battle each week, earning experience along the way that could be then used when he ascended. The experience buildup wouldn't work for further classes though. This was a one-time thing before the ascension. He thought about his status. He wanted to see all the new skills that he had gained as well as their explanations. Mana bolt spell, a focused bolt of mana energy that deals mana damage to one target. The damage done depends on the user's intelligence. Basic mana shaping skill lets the mage shape mana into spells, gives bonuses to intelligence and willpower. The higher the skill, the better the user is at forming spells. Basic mana regulation skill helps regulate the mana in the user's body. Increases mana regeneration by helping absorb ambient mana from the environment. Mage class increases mana by 20% and increases mana regeneration by 15%. Blessed by mana trait unlocked. If a person has more than 40 intelligence after reaching the mage class at the first ascension ritual, gives bonuses to MP after each level up. Basic incantation skill increases spell chanting speed and proficiency. He then looked at his stats. After he was done with reading those, his MP shot up quite high compared to the rest. Name: Roland Arden, Mage, L3, P1, 185, 1, 185 and P7, 119, 7, 119 speed, 237, 237 strength, 14 agility, 15 dexterity, 24 vitality, 14 endurance, 15 intelligence, 47 willpower, 26 charisma, 10 luck, 6. He looked at his stats. People at L1 who specialized in a field mostly had their stats at about 20. For instance, a warrior would mostly have a strength, vitality, and endurance rating close to 20. He was a L3 mage, and his intelligence was getting close to 50. But all his physical attributes were slightly below a basic L1 warrior. All my stats scream mage. I even got a trait that gives me more useless mana. Even if I respec later, I will be behind everyone. My physical stats are below average when it comes to warriors. My dexterity is high, though. Should I switch to an archer? He started scratching his head and brought out the book that had some class and skill combinations. This was something that a noble title got you. Most of the people outside didn't have the luxury of planing, and most of the class combinations were off limits to the commoners. He had focused on the mage-related classes without much thought about the other ones for one reason or the other. He put all of his eggs in one basket, and now they exploded at once. He needed to come out with a new battle plan. I must think of something plausible. If I leave it to that daddy of mine, I'll be working in the army for the rest of my life. All of his brothers were on a one-way ticket to the army. His father was quite the militaristic nut, and didn't consider people that didn't work in that field as much. At least that was how Roland saw it. He couldn't be sure as the interactions with his father were limited. He also tried to avoid him most of the time along with the other brats from his family. He was banking on evading the military by becoming a mage. Mages were rarer than the other combat classes, and were sought after. He would be able to choose his path if he became one. Apparently, that wouldn't be an option now. He would have to level up in this class, which was a dead end. I still have the mage class unlocked, but if I wanted to be a magic swordsman, I'd need a tier 2 mage class to unlock this tier 3 class. He went through his book once more. Most of the better classes that synergized with the mage class required a tier 2 version. You even needed some tier 2 classes to unlock other tiers 2 classes that would let you get a better tier 3 class. The elementalist class was one of those that required all of the element tier 2 mage classes to unlock. Damn elemental affinity. I need this skill to even unlock a general upgrade to the tier 1 class. I would be okay with this shitty tier 2 superior mage class that doesn't really give many bonuses to anything, but it also requires those affinities. They are just lower. He wanted to strangle the person that decided that you needed to have one skill to unlock any one of those classes. The possibility of having this was super low, 1 in a million or less. Does it have something to do with me being from another world or something? Wait, do I really need to have a combat class? Wouldn't it be better not to risk my life and just make money in peace? He rubbed his chin. He had ignored most of the construction classes that were presented there, mostly due to the only viable one at tier 1 was the blacksmith. He imagined himself stuck in a stuffy room hammering away on some ingots. Well, might not be that bad. Is there anything that works well with a tier 1 mage class till tier 3 at least? He went through the book. It had some combinations that could work with the blacksmith class. Blacksmith is the first and gives basic bonuses to crafting weapons and armor, but nothing special. You can unlock a weaponsmith or an armor at tier 2. After that, the most common classes are tier 3 master smith and tier 4 grandmaster smith. He started going for the requirements for those classes. The blacksmith class used dexterity as one of its main stats along with strength and endurance. Those two later stats weren't so high, but he had high dex, so this was feasible. Plus he would gain more strength by leveling up his mage class, so when he started anew as a blacksmith, he shouldn't have any problems. I need to find something that combines with those first. He looked for the page that described good combinations with these manufacturing classes. He knew that enchanted weapons were a thing, so there should be a class that was primed for that. Here we go, tier 2 runesmith that focuses on enchanting weapons and armor with words of power that are called runes. He looked at this class. The description sounded interesting. It allowed the placement of basic enchantments on weapons and other items. There was another class that was similar to this called enchantsmith. The two differed slightly due to the process of creating their items. Enchantments and runes used a different language. If you compared the two to modern-day languages from Earth, then the enchantment language would be akin to regular English. The runic language, on the other hand, consisted of symbols and was more similar to Asian languages like Japanese or Chinese. From the two, the runic one was considered better, but harder to master. Both of those Tier 2 smith classes required him to learn the scribe profession. The Manhwa scribe was a special Tier 1 class, and its requirement was the calligraphy skill along with the mage class. It allowed people to create use magic scrolls. The class sounded special, but in reality, it was quite trashy. You didn't get many skills, and the only thing it was good for was for creating these scrolls. Leveling it up didn't give you many stat points, and it was mostly considered a side job. Still, the scrolls that a person produced could be sold to adventurers. The higher tier scrolls you could write, the more you got paid. Runesmith or enchantsmith. The first was better, but harder to obtain as you had to gain a skill related to runes. It was something you only unlocked by actually learning. There wasn't really a shortcut, as you had to study hard, and then you unlocked the skill. Well, I have always been a grinder and wanted to take it easy, but the thought of living in some shady barracks with some smelly dudes was making him debate on this option. The path towards it was quite convoluted, and he would have to work hard for it. In the end though, this was a money-making class. Even at Tier 2, he would already be able to earn massive amounts of gold and be free from this noble life. It was worth the risk. I'd like to go with this. These runes sound interesting, and it says that the more intelligence and dexterity the crafter has, the better the runes become. Also, the mana comes in handy when making or using them, and mana is the only thing I'm good for. The only problem was convincing his father. This choice wasn't a battle class. He also didn't see any options that hinted about unlocking any combat-related classes after getting to runesmith. It was still better than working as a soldier, though. He'd rather make swords all day than stay on guard duty at some fortress. Okay, it's decided. I'm going with runesmith. I can make this work. Having money is the answer. He looked at the book and nodded. He had to prepare before meeting his dad. He needed to explain that this was a better idea and maybe even a blessing in disguise. He already had 3 sons that were good at fighting. He didn't need the 4th one to do the exact same thing as them. Yes, I bet he will let me do it. I hope. I need to find a location that I can learn blacksmithing and scribing, along with some magic. He concentrated. He had gone through all the books in the library and knew how the kingdom looked like. The main plan was to go to a magic academy that was located in one of the largest cities, but that went out of the window now. He needed a less costly option that would guarantee him safe progress. There is one. Lustile City fits the bill. It also has an academy where they train weaponsmiths and even have some facilities for mages and a nice library. The battle plan was set. He went through it for the rest of the day as he waited for his father to come home. He already had an appointment. His father was quite punctual, so he knew that he would be there. The next day Martha brought him food and a change of clothes. She made him look better than usual. She couldn't let Roland look bad when visiting his father all on his own. Everything is going to be fine, Master Roland. It's just a little setback. She smiled at him, her face showing some wrinkles, as she was getting along with her age. Being a maid didn't really net her any valuable skills besides housekeeping. People needed battle classes to increase vitality, that would then let them live longer and look younger. His father was one of those. He was someone that looked to be in his early 40s, but in reality, he was getting close to his mid-60s. The Baron will see you now, proclaimed the House Arden butler, while opening the large white door that led inside Lord Arden's office. Roland moved forward. Even though he was an adult inside, he still felt uncomfortable. It was as if he was getting called into his boss's office for one of those talks. There he was in all his glory, looking at some papers that looked really small in those mitts of his. His digits looked like thick sausages, and he looked strange in that blue shirt fit for nobles. Greetings, father, it is me, Roland. He announced himself while moving his hand to his heart, which was the national salute that the people did in this country. The man just murmured while looking at his papers. Roland gulped hard and used this chance to pronounce his plan. Father, I know that I have no aptitude to be a mage, so I think I should become a runesmith. It's a class that my high intelligence works well with. He was nervous and talked as fast as he could without breathing in much between the sentences. He presented his plan and the city that had the best facilities to accommodate his progress at a safe rate. As he was finishing up, his father raised his hand. Lustile? You want to attend the Lustile Academy of Arts? Roland stopped talking instantly. His large bull of a father was looking at him with quite the intense stare now. Why, yes. Think it has good facilities and doesn't cost that much. The man rubbed his chin and replied without thinking for too long. No, that's out of the question. You need to raise your level first. Runesmith, a peculiar choice. He placed the papers that he was holding down on the desk and continued looking at Roland, straight into his eyes. I'll allow this, but you must earn your keep. Even as a low-level mage, you can find some work. Adam will make the preparations. He picked up the papers and started going through them once more. He gave Roland one bit of advice before sending him away. The Arden House is a house of knights. I hope you know what that means. We don't want it being associated with crafting professions, do you understand? So, you're telling me that it is shameful to work as a blacksmith, and you don't want me to mention my name in public, huh? Understood. Roland wanted to say more about this, but he didn't think that the man would listen to the 10-year-old him. So he just nodded and stepped out. Adam heard everything from both of them, and would be making the arrangement. His plan of becoming a runesmith had gone through, but he would apparently have to work for it, and maybe even put himself in harm's way. Chapter 7. New place, old woe. A 10-year-old with a sword in his right hand was standing in a dark, damp dungeon. In front of him, 2 green humanoid-looking monsters were glaring. These goblins gave out a loud, high-pitched sound and charged forward. The boy stood still, his sword arm lowered while the left one was raised up. He was mumbling something incoherent to himself. The more he did, the louder he got. Source of all magic, heed my call. He had his index finger pointing at the charging monster, the other 3 clenched together tightly. Suddenly, a bluish glow appeared in front of those fingers. It started out small as a grain of rice, but soon the tiny speck expanded to the size of an egg. The furthermost goblin was now just a couple of steps away from the youth. Its teeth were rattling as it was ready to feast on its prey. Gather before me and strike down my enemies, Mana Bolt, the boy shouted, and the egg-sized energy ball shot forward. It collided with the monster's head, inserting itself right into the eye socket before exploding. The boy gazed at the humanoid being, part of its head, exploding as it collapsed on the ground, and slid forward due to the momentum of its charge. The other monster didn't show much of a reaction after seeing its friend's head partially exploding. It just charged on and tried clawing at the youth. Roland was counting on this, and he just stepped to the side, the overswing and forward momentum of the monster's attack giving him an opportunity for a counter. There was no hesitation in his movement like a year before. His trusted short sword was plunged right into his enemy's throat. The goblin moved his hands to its neck as a reflex, the blade that was stuck in it getting pulled out instantly. A fountain of monster blood erupted. The creature fell down, dead and unmoving. Well, think I've killed all of them. I guess that's it for the easy XP. But do I really need to chant cringy stuff like that every time? Maybe not being suited for a mage was a blessing in disguise? Roland was standing in the training dungeon, his old trainer nowhere to be seen. He had finished the last of the goblins. These creatures were captured for training purposes, and it would be a shame to waste the experience. Wonder where that old bastard will send me to, probably to some cheap backwater village where he can forget about his useless son. Roland poked the first goblin that he killed with his mana bolt. The power of this spell was so, it was fine against weak spots like the eyes, but took some time to aim, and you couldn't fire them off in quick succession. He also needed to chant his spell, which lowered the speed and utility of this skill. I guess that's why mages are considered a backline class. Will I need to find myself a party of some sort? Will Daddy Dearest give me a servant for protection? He poked the other goblin with his sword as well, his eyes focusing more as he tried to feel for a mana signature. This one has a monster core. Monster cores, or also called mana stones, looked like gems or crystals. They formed in some creatures, and were used as ingredients for various things. There was a low chance of finding them in a goblin. The stone inside this monster was the size of a grain of rice. Best keep this for myself. He didn't trust the people in this estate. He tried returning the monster core to one of the servants, but instead of getting a reward, it was just snatched. They just gave him the excuse that this was the property of the Baron, and would be used for the estate. He on the other hand was sure that the servants were probably pocketing things that could be sold for themselves. Thus they developed a habit of withholding items and information. These things are small enough for me to keep them in my pocket. He looked at the cold and dark dungeon and then quickly left. He was seen by some servants that were back to treating him coldly after the big reveal. He continued walking further, finding a certain thick hedge wall. He squeezed through a certain spot and arrived at a small area with a large tree. He was surrounded by shrubs and greenery. On the other side was the flower garden where mostly the noble ladies had their tea parties. He leaned up against the tree and took out a small box filled with some sandwiches. This type of food wasn't popular here as nobles mostly ate food prepared by the chefs. He had managed to convince Martha to make him some so that he could eat it on the way. Tomorrow is the day, finally leaving this shithole, get that going for me at least. He bit into the bread that had some cheese and meat in it and started eating it. While he was thinking about his future, he heard something rustling in the bushes. Even without looking in the direction, he knew who that was. Big Brothier Row, and he heard a child's voice. It was high-pitched, and the pronunciation wasn't quite there. This was his new younger sister. His dad couldn't keep it in his pants, and the mistress gave birth to this child. It's not Ro, but Roland Lucian. For some reason, this kid liked to run around the compound looking for him. She had somehow found his hiding place. Luckily, the child knew how to keep a secret. She was even super happy when he told her that it would be a secret between the two. Lady Francine doesn't like it when you talk to me. She'll give you and me an earful if she finds out. The small girl with golden locks didn't seem to care, as she just ran up and gave her big brother a hug. Roland felt a bit uncomfortable from the show of affection and reluctantly petted her head. "If Shawatham, Wami won't find out," the small girl proclaimed while looking at the sandwich that was in Roland's mouth. The brother reluctantly gave up his breakfast to the child. "Ah, have it your way, you little squirt. Roth, you are my birthday ith, shun don't forget though come." Roland looked at the girl and gave her chubby cheeks a little pinch. "Your birthday, yes, it should be in a couple of weeks. It would be her 3rd birthday, this time." While he was in the family's good graces, he was allowed to take part in it, even though he mostly just sat in the corner, not doing much. "I will see what I can do now. Run along before your mother catches you here." He ruffled up his sister's head before escaping her big green eyes. He didn't want to lie to a child of this age, but it was better than making her cause a scene. He would be leaving tomorrow, and he couldn't do much about it. "She'll forget me after a few months. Not sure if I'll ever return to this mansion after I leave anyway." He left towards his room. He was mostly packed, all thanks to his trusted maid Martha. The same woman was now hugging while weeping. "Calm down, Martha. I will be fine. No, young master. I will go to the Lord and ask for permission to come with you. How can he send you away unattended?" The woman was quite attached to him, but he wouldn't be allowed to take any servants with him. "Adam said that I will be looked after there. Don't need to worry about anything. This was bound to happen." The woman dried her tears with a handkerchief while looking at the smaller boy. "Young master, be sure to write a letter if there is something bothering you. You're such a brave young lad. You never did cry or complain about anything. Such an obedient child." She continued hugging him while sobbing. In the end, he had to push her out of his room. He needed to check if he took everything that he could. He decided to take some blank papers and some calligraphy books. He needed to heighten the skill to the maximum sooner or later. The night went by fast, and he was ready to leave. The only person to send him of was, of course, his personal maid that looked like she didn't sleep too well. She sure loved this Roland boy, didn't she? The new Roland didn't feel like this woman's affection was focused on him. She was probably just a gentle soul that cared for the child that once was inhabiting this body. From his perspective, if she ever found out that it was occupied by some weird nerd from Earth, she would probably do a quick 180. Still, he felt a bit sad to leave her here with these posh assholes. "Maybe in the future, if I have enough money, I can hire her myself." He stepped into the coach. His bags were ready. He waved at the friendly lady and was finally able to leave. The next destination was the train station. Yes, this world had trains. There were also flying airships, but they were above the Baron's pay grade. Roland had once visited one of these magic stations. The contraptions looked like old-fashioned steam trains, but instead of steam, they run on monostones. There was no one to send him of. The coachman and his helper just carried his bags to the train, and that was it. He waited there for the mono-engine train to arrive. Compared to the earthly counterparts, there were a lot more wagons getting pulled behind it. Besides transporting people, it was used for moving various goods. "Well then, I'll be off," he muttered to himself. He had slowly gotten used to the solitude that this world provided him with. He sat down at his designated seat and looked at other families sending their loved ones off with hugs. He could see some of them smile, and others were even crying while waving at the train that was leaving. "Family, huh?" He turned away, not sure what to make of this, his eyes closing as he tried taking a nap. The ride was going to be a long one. Back at the Arden estate, Adam was getting called in by the Baron for a little chat. "Did he leave?" "Yes, my lord." "He didn't reject the offer?" "Did you make it clear?" "Yes, my lord. He knows the destination." The muscly man tapped the desk he was sitting on while looking out the window. "He is surprisingly headstrong. His performance against the lesser monsters was satisfactory." The butler nodded. If you compared the boy to the other young masters, he lacked the stats of a warrior, but he was very resolute and clear-headed. Even during the first fight, he didn't suffer much of a setback. His brothers, on the other hand, mostly failed, and had to be rescued by their helpers. With some training, he could pass for a knight. "He wishes to be a lowly smith, though." The man frowned. He couldn't let the other nobles know what he had a son working as a blacksmith. "Don't worry, sir, everything was prepared. The boy will probably ask for assistance in due time." The Baron nodded and waved his servant away. He was smoking quite a large cigar. He blew out some smoke through his nostrils before speaking out to himself. "If he doesn't, then so be it. It will be his choice. He is old enough to make his own mistakes." He placed the cigar to the side, and then focused back on the military papers in his hand. He was still lagging behind schedule. Roland had no idea what his parent was plotting back home, but soon he would discover it. The train ride would take a couple of days. The speed of this machine wasn't great, and it was pulling a lot of weight. The seats were uncomfortable, and the constant sounds of heavy machinery were keeping the young man awake. He shook his head and looked outside at the constantly changing scenery. He also took a glance at some of the skills he had learned during the almost 5-year period he was at the noble house. Basic 1. Handed swordsmanship L9 gives a bonus to 1 Handed swordsmanship combat along with the basic knowledge. Basic hand-to-hand combat L9 gives a bonus to hand-to-hand combat along with the basic knowledge. Basic running L9, a skill that lets a person run slightly faster and use less stamina while running. Basic sprint L9, a skill that lets a person sprint faster and use less stamina while sprinting. Basic climbing L9, a skill that helps you climb surfaces. Basic sneaking L9, a skill that allows the user to blend with the environment and avoid detection, lowers the noise produced by the user's footsteps. Basic leather armor proficiency for a person with this skill can move better in leather armor. He had gained many skills that began with basic. They filled out his skill menu, and he even had to scroll down to read them all. I never could push them past L9, probably because of class restrictions. Had to sneak out during the nights to get that sneaking skill up. Ugh, when will we finally arrive? What was that place's name again? Ah yeah, the city of Karwin. He only had the location of this city on the map. It was just in the middle of the kingdom, without anything special about it. The only thing that was going for it was that it had a dungeon right next to it. The ride continued without anything happening along the way. Roland was half expecting someone to try to rob the train, but there were a lot of strong-looking people guarding it. Now arriving at Karwin, please take all of your belongings while going out. The technology in this world was strange. Some parts were ahead of his old world, while others were lagging behind. Like the flying ships, planes from his old world didn't compare to those flying fortresses. Supposedly, if you are a high-level master smith, you can work on those. Maybe I'll be making flying yachts in the future. He smiled to himself while departing from the train. There were many people in various-looking clothes. Some were more Victorian-era looking while others looked like medieval knights in full plate armor. Are you Sir Roland? It didn't take long for someone to notice him. It was a man in his 30s with quite the large handlebar mustache. Yes, that's me. You must be the hired help. Yes, please follow me. I have been instructed to take you to your lodgings. The man helped Roland carry the luggage, and had a carriage prepared for him to ride on. He was slowly getting nervous, wondering what his new living place would be. He was counting on it mostly being some kind of barrack area with other people, maybe a room at an inn came with bed and breakfast. The two left the train station, and they started moving. Roland could see the city through the carriage window. He saw some wooden buildings here and there, even an inn, and the fabled Adventurers Guild building. Guess you can really become an adventurer. But a better term for it would be a monster hunter or hired help, as you just do odd jobs. The coach started moving out of the city after the coachman told the guards something and headed forward. The more they traveled, the narrower the roads got. After 30 minutes of heading God knows where, Roland started to get worried. He didn't bring me out here to rob me, did he? He knew that I was coming, so I didn't really ask for any identification. What if he wasn't hired by the Baron? What if he killed the real servant, and I'm next in line? His mind raced, and he moved his hand to the side. He had taken a dagger for a situation like this, and was now clutching it while sweating. He had left his leather armor and short sword in his baggage, so this was his side weapon. Soon enough the journey ended, and he heard the coachman getting off, his steps getting closer and closer. The door swung open, Roland ready to pull out his weapon, but he halted as he saw a bored-looking man with luggage in hand. Sir Roland, this is the place I was supposed to take you. I also have a letter from your father, Baron Wentworth. I'm a bit too jumpy today. I must be tired after the long bumpy ride. Roland gave out a sigh of relief and finally stepped outside. What he saw, there was a small cabin in the woods. There was a small porch with stairs leading up to it. It looked old and unkempt from where he was standing. Was this supposed to be his new home? Could there be some kind of mistake? Why would father prepare a rundown cabin like this for me? The servant handed Roland the letter he received and started unpacking. The youth quickly removed the noble seal that indicated that this was the real deal. This lodging has been prepared for you by the Arden House. Don't expect to get any more monetary aid in the future. If you find living here to be too challenging, you are free to return and enlist in the kingdom's army. Does he want me to do that noblesse oblige crap so the other sons won't have to? Noblesse oblige was more or less an excuse for the nobles to act as if they had a stick up their rear end. It was used to imply that with wealth, power, and prestige come responsibilities, mostly ones that concerned military conscription. The problem with that was that when the time came for this, most nobles made a run for it. Most of the time when it came to this, the nobles sent away their sons that weren't an heir to the house name. Roland was just the person that fit that bill, born of a commoner, and with no backing at all. Roland crumbled the paper up, his eyes bulging and his face going red. I will be leaving then, Sir Roland, or do you wish to return? I was instructed to take you back if you wish for it. Roland snapped out of it and glared at the coachman. No, this is fine, just leave. I will be fine. Yes, sir. There is a well to the east. If you walk for 10 minutes towards the city, there is also a spring to the west if you go deeper inside of the forest, but you must be wary of the animals. He was left alone. The sun was going under, and he was feeling cold. He started carrying all of his belongings into the wooden cabin. Inside was little space and even less helpful items. There was a shabby bed with a mattress that was just cloth filled with straw and hay. There was something akin to a stove in the corner, some chairs, a wooden desk, and some animal pelts. He sat down on one of those chairs, the crumpled up note in his hands getting surrounded by his mana, which caused it to catch on fire. Mana was still a type of energy, so it was able to produce fire in some form if it came in contact with flammable items. So, this was it. He wants me to give up, so that he has an excuse to shove me into his little army. I bet that's why he agreed to it so easily in the first place. He doesn't expect a 10-year-old brat to manage on his own. He wants me to come back crying. Heh. He took out the pouch with his money and counted it. He needed to see how much it would last him. He needed food and water. The rest were all secondary. Think I'll have to pay that Adventurers Guild a visit. Chapter 8. Adventurers Guild. Roland opened up his eyes. His body was stiff and sore. This new bed was even worse than the one at the noble estate, and it was terribly windy in this cabin. He needed to procure some wood for the fireplace and also clean everything in here. It was dusty and even moldy in a couple of places. It didn't look like a place a 10-year-old should be living in. I need to eat something. He had some food packed, but it wouldn't last him long. He needed to depend on the meager amount of coins he had received. From what he counted, they would last him about a month. At least the lodging is free here. Maybe I'll move to an inn when I earn something. I need to get to that Adventurers Guild, but will they even let a 10-year-old work for them? Roland knew that adventurers existed in this world. They were mostly considered sellswords. They were more or less hired thugs that hunted monsters for parts and defended merchant convoys from bandits most of the time. They were the odd jobbers of this world. If you gave them enough coin, they would do it. Hey, at least I managed to get this thing. He pulled out a crystal. It was similar to the one used for the Ascension ceremony and worked in a similar way. Roland knew that they cost a lot, so he nabbed one from the Baron's estate while no one was looking. With this, I will be able to respect to a blacksmith or mana scribe, not sure what is better. He nodded and hid the items. He was living in the middle of nowhere, and there was a possibility of his house getting sacked while he was away. He couldn't be sure. From a logical standpoint, someone wouldn't put their son in a place that could get robbed. But it's the Baron we are talking about. He might even hire some goons to rough me up to prove a point. He decided to bury the class-up stone away from the log cabin, making sure that it didn't stand out. He had quite the memory, so he didn't need to mark the tree he buried it by, which could only alert someone to the buried treasure. How much money do I have? Not sure about the market value of food here. They never let us shop for ourselves. He returned to his cabin and emptied the coin pouch that he had. All of the coins were stacked on one pile. He didn't even need to count them thanks to his arithmetic skill. He just needed to look at the pile on the table, and a number hovered about it, giving him the exact amount of coin he had. This comes down to exactly 1 small gold coin, or 10 large silver coins. What I have here are, in this world, there were 3 types of coins with 2 variations. Each coin had a small and large version. The cheapest one was the small copper coin. 10 of those made up 1 large copper coin, and 10 of those were worth as much as a small silver coin. You went all the way up to golden coins. Above a large golden coin stood a royal golden coin that was larger and rectangular in shape. Some copper coins and silver ones. Wonder how much this will last. Should I cook for myself and save on money? Or, he glanced to the side and looked at the shabby stove and some rusty pots and pans in the corner. The idea about cooking for himself went out of the window. At most he would buy things like apples or sausages that he could eat without cooking. He looked at himself. He managed to take a small mirror from the noble house. He was wearing standard black leather armor. It consisted of a chest piece, pauldrons, a sword belt, arm guards, a belt with a pouch, and leather boots with some knee protectors. To the side, he had his short sword. He also nabbed a hunting knife from one of the workers while packing. This would save him money on skinning utensils. The knife could also be used as a last-ditch effort of defending himself. 8. Time to head out. He left the shabby log cabin. The thing had a small lock, but if someone decided to kick the door down, it would snap in half. Roland had to move somewhere else. He was in the middle of the forest with no protection. In his mind, this was something that his father set up. He was probably getting watched by someone. I bet he told people in town to keep an eye out for me. Well, at least he cares. Though I bet it has more to do with the House Arden reputation. Can't have some kid be loose shouting his noble name everywhere. He was convinced that his so-called dad didn't really care for him. He probably left some guards so that he wouldn't croak on the first day. But from what he saw in the letter, the man probably wanted him to join the army. Roland, on the other hand, was set on never returning home. He had enough of living under the rules of other people. It was time for some freedom. Even back in his old life, he felt like he was too dependent on others. It was time for a change. Well, I just need to make enough money, then everything will work out. It was time to go back to the town he had arrived. He remembered the path that the coachman took and backtracked. He was slower on foot, but with some jogging, he could make it in half an hour if he wanted to. The first obstacle proved to be the guards at the entrance. They demanded a fee of 5 large copper coins right off the bat. "Kid, you new here?" one of the guards asked, while giving him 5 large copper coins back in exchange for the small silver coin. "Yes, is the Adventurers Guild recruiting?" The guard raised his eyebrow and looked at the child in front of him. Roland was a bit taller than other kids, so he could pass for being older. Still, he didn't look older than 12 or 13 at the most. "You? An adventurer? You sure you don't want to work as a stable boy instead?" The guard smirked, his buddy laughing on the side while Roland left slightly annoyed. "Damn assholes, will I have to pay an entrance fee each time I come here? I'll be out of cash in no time." After passing through the checkpoint, he kept walking while looking at the surroundings. The main road was made out of large stone blocks and stretched through the city and right towards a large castle-like structure in the distance. The castle was probably where the city lord stayed in, or either the noble house that was responsible for this plot of land. He continued on while paying attention to the structures more than to the people. The whole place looked like a medieval fantasy city. The buildings were mostly made from stone, and the roofs were slightly tipped at an angle and made from what looked to be thin red brick tiles. After some more walking, he found himself standing in front of a large building with saloon-like doors. It had a sign with 2 axes on the sides and 1 longsword in the middle. Above the symbol, the words Carwin Adventurers Guild was written. "It will be fine, right?" He gulped, as all of his future plans depended on this. If he didn't manage to get a job here, he would be forced to work somewhere else. That stable boy job might not seem that outlandish at the time. He started getting nervous and just stood there in front of the door not doing anything. While he was hesitating, some people walked out. It was a group of adventurers, 4 of them. Roland snapped out of it and moved to the side. The people gave him a side glance before departing. Wait, was that an elf? And that was a dwarf, right? Roland kept his eyes on the backs of the people that just walked out. In his noble house, there were only humans, and he never saw any other humanoid races anywhere besides the goblins that he trained on. One of the adventurers was an elven woman with long golden hair and wearing green clothes. She had an arrow quiver on her back and a longbow to go with it, indicating that she was an archer class. Next to her was a short man below 150 cm in height. He made up his height disparity with his width. Roland could clearly see he was quite muscular and was carrying a long axe weapon. There were 2 other people with her, a man carrying a sword and some lady in a robe. So, that's a full-blown adventurer party. That lady in the robe might be a mage, or a priest class. He pumped himself up and finally pushed the doors open. They squeaked as he entered. The people inside gave him a fast glance, but then went back to their business. The guild was quite large, and there were even stairs leading up to a higher level. He walked in slowly, as other people were already going in and out. Inside there were your usual things that made up such a building. A long counter at which some guild workers were standing. All of them were women for some reason. There was your standard large bulletin board, with all of the job listings. Finding a suiting job from that chaotic-looking thing looked like a hassle. There were some tables and chairs on the side. Some of the guild members were chatting with each other. They were even getting served by some bar wenches, apparently. You could relax and eat something here while waiting for your loot to be apprised. The place looked busy, but he was lucky as one of the guild workers was free, and he could go ask his questions. He walked up to the receptionist. The lady behind it was all smiles, and was wearing a pair of glasses. "How can I help you today? Oh, aren't you a little young?" The woman fixed her glasses while looking at the youth. She saw a boy in full gear that was about 150 cm. What he was wearing looked like second-hand goods that saw some usage. He had short dark hair and green eyes. His head was oval, shaped, his eyebrows not too thin or bushy. He wasn't all too cute or ugly, more or less average looking for his age. "Yes, I would like to register with the guild. My name is Roland." The boy spoke out while looking at the slightly taller woman. The guild worker looked over the youth some more, which made Roland somewhat nervous. "She won't ask me to get my parents now, will she? You want to register? Only people that went through the Ascension ritual can register. Do you have a Tier 1 class?" Roland nodded. "Yes, I have a class and went through my Ascension ritual." The woman pulled out an orb that looked similar to the one they used back home for measuring things. "Please place your hand on this measuring crystal." Roland nodded. This was probably a required test that needed to be done. He had read that adventurer guilds would do a background check with such devices, but the information was confidential and wouldn't leak out. The woman glanced over the text that appeared on the orb. It had all of Roland's main stats along with his full name and class. Name: Roland, Ardent Mage, L5, P1, 198, 198 MP7, 164, 7, 164, Sp2, 153, 2, 153 Strength, 15 Agility, 16 Dexterity, 25 Vitality, 15 Endurance, 16 Intelligence, 50 Willpower, 28 Charisma, 10 Luck, 6. She could see all of his stats. Her eyes remained glued to the intelligence stat for a moment before she moved on and finally spoke out. You will have to make a payment of 2 large silver coins for your adventurer card. If you agree, please fill out this form and wait till it's made. He took the piece of paper. He had to fill out his name and agree to some terms. Terms like that the guild was not responsible for his death and where his belongings should be sent if he died on the job. It didn't take long for the woman to walk away with the orb and paper in hand. He sat down in the corner of the guild and waited. The lady informed him that his card would be made within the hour. He took his time to observe the people in the building. They were of various races and genders. He saw more elves, lizard-like people, more dwarfs, and huge individuals that looked like muscular basketball players. Think that person is from the Goliath race. The book said that they are known for their strength. They are a race of warriors, but they lack some intelligence and like to solve their problems with fighting. The lizard-like people are probably dragon kin. Supposedly, they have dragon blood running through their veins. It said that they get confused with the lesser lizardman monsters from time to time. Surprising that I didn't get thrown out from here. They didn't even think to ask me about my age. Roland was still someone with his old values. He didn't understand how people could let a 10-year-old just work as an adventurer. People in this world were different. If you had the ability to work, you could work. No one looked at the person's age. After going through the ascension ritual, you were deemed worthy. He was handed his adventurer's card, but before that, he had to poke his thumb and let a drop of blood land on it. The moment it landed, it shone for a fraction of a second. His rank and photo along with the name Roland appeared. The adventure cards only showed your first name, but you could add a family name or a title there if you wanted. Roland decided on keeping his noble title a secret. For now, only the guild would have his full credentials. He wasn't the first person in this world that wanted to leave his past behind, and last names were associated with noble houses. The registration process is finished. Congratulations on becoming a bronze rank adventurer. As a bronze rank, you are allowed to take on jobs at the bronze and steel rank. It is advised to take jobs at your own rank. You will find the job listings on the notice board. If you fail to complete a job you take, you will have to pay a fine. This is how his registration ended, going quite smoothly and without a hiccup. He decided to take a look at the available jobs, taking the advice to heart about not taking jobs above his grade. What type of jobs can a bronze rank adventurer take? He started glancing at the papers. Luckily, they were all organized by their rank. Requesting a worker for latrine cleaning, 10 large coppers a day. Mr. Fuzzles has gone missing. He is a brown cat requesting help in moving furniture and other heavy objects, searching for someone to cut grass. He narrowed his eyes as he continued going through all the bronze grade listings. They were all odd jobs that didn't require any fighting power. Maybe that's why they accepted me as an adventurer so easily. They expect me to do these shitty jobs and not actually do anything dangerous. Roland didn't want to spend his day cleaning toilets or cutting grass. He needed to get his level up fast and earn more money. After going through most of the bronze grade listings, he moved to the steel grade ones. Goblins have been appearing close to the farms and are killing the livestock. 5 large copper per goblin, left ear needed as proof. He read and found a subjugation request right off the bat. More goblins, huh? Probably should stick to monsters I'm familiar with. There were other listings concerning monsters besides that. There was a nearby dungeon, but he couldn't enter it alone as a bronze rank adventurer. He would either need to find a party or get himself up to steel rank. He went through some other possible creatures he could hunt outside the dungeon, and decided to stick to that for the time being. Think I'll go eat something first, and then head out. There were also notices for bringing in monster deers and boars for me. Guess you can eat those. He left the Adventurers Guild identification card in hand. He wanted to do a small tour of the town, maybe find better lodging than that shady shack in the woods. Then it would be time for work. His adventure was only starting. Chapter 9. Slaying more goblins. Roland walked and walked. The place he was in wasn't that large. If he compared it to the cities from his old world, this was more of a small town. A large wall was surrounding the area, and the buildings were closely packed together. These types of standard fortifications were there in place to protect the city people from monster attacks. Even in large kingdoms like this, there were certain places that were off limits. Places with nasty monsters or poisonous terrain that made the area unlivable. After a long time of walking and getting his adventurer card, he decided to take a break at an inn. Inside there were a lot of people chatting, and a bard-like person was playing on some kind of lute instrument. Just like the Adventurers Guild, this establishment's interior was quite large. There were many tables that already had a bunch of individuals sitting in them. He felt a bit out of place as he didn't know a single person in this city. There is some room in the corner there. Do I need to wait for a waitress? Do they call them bar wenches here? He wasn't really sure. Noble houses didn't really have any books about how the commoners lived. For now, he decided to wait and see. He could probably learn from the patrons in here on how he should present himself. He sat himself down at the free table and looked at the people. Again he was greeted by a colorful array of individuals. The elves were just as he read in books and saw in fiction. They were tall and slender with pointy ears. Their hair color was either blonde or white. He didn't spot any dark elves though. While waiting, a waitress finally appeared and gave Roland a curious look. "What will it be, little guy?" He looked up. The woman was quite large and on the wider side. She was wearing one of those wench dresses that made him think of a German festival. I'll just have some water and something to eat." "What do you have? For a charming little fellow like you. How about some of the tasty porridge, or some grilled meat so that you grow big and strong?" Roland thought about it for a moment, and ordered both. He wanted to test the food here out. If it was abysmal, he would try a different place. The woman smiled and walked away. He saw her move towards the bartender. The woman was quite loud, so he overheard the two talking. "One order of meat, and some porridge for our young customer there." The man standing at the bar was quite large and muscular. He was even missing an eye, and had a large scar in its place. "What, you got someone to order that shitty gruel? Did you blackmail him or something?" The woman frowned and tried smacking the man with the empty tray she was holding. "Shut your trap, you idiot, before I make you sleep outside again." The man grumbled and went back into the kitchen. Roland, on the other hand, was deliberating on walking out. He didn't like the sound of that. Could this porridge be spoiled? Well, this was quite bland. He looked at the empty plates. The porridge was made from some unidentified grains. The meat was just dried jerky. Nothing was seasoned, nor did it taste like anything. The food here was literally hard to swallow. "I'm already missing Martha's cooking. Is this what the common people eat?" The whole thing cost him 7 large copper coins. "So I need to kill 2 goblins to even have enough for a single meal. Yes, life doesn't count for much here. I should have asked the guild attendant about how much I can get for a goblin mana stone. I'll ask her after I get this job done." He left the coins on the table. The large lady instantly swooped in to grab those coins of the table. Like a hawk diving for a nice plump mouse on the field. He asked about the lodging fees, and was said that it was 2 small silvers for a night, and 5 large copper coins extra, if he wanted breakfast to go with that. He could also pay a monthly fee that would save him about 10%. "I have enough money to last me slightly above a month of lodging." He needed to go hunt some goblins first. Killing 5 of those a day would be the minimum amount of work. Though, he would probably be starting with only 1 meal a day with that, and that's not taking any other expenses into consideration. "This sword will also need repairing after a while." He frowned. This wasn't turning out to be such a dream job after all. He needed to start somewhere though. He was already used to slaying goblins, and was already a L5 mage. He only needed 20 more levels, and he already had the stone for the class change. "The only thing I still need is a map of this area." He had the world map at his old home, but there were no city maps besides the capital and the city his family lived in. He headed over to a library, and had to spend another small silver coin to get himself one. He made a mental note to check this place out later. Maybe there would be some new books to read. The more he read, the more his identification skill leveled up. Knowledge was power, and this skill's level was an indicator of it. Strange how that skill works. Why would general knowledge help me identify things I have never seen before? He left through the main gate again. This time he flashed the guards his new adventurer's card, and was let out without a problem. "Okay, these are the farms that have been getting attacked. The goblins are probably somewhere in that forest." Goblins were creatures that lived in groups. They had a strength-based hierarchy structure similar to some human tribes. The strongest member was the tribe chief. The leader was mostly an evolved monster, either a goblin soldier, or a goblin shaman that was more intelligent than his tribe counterparts. "I sure hope it's not a hobgoblin though. I don't think I'd stand a chance." He wasn't planning on going to close to the monster base, or doing a silly thing of clearing it out himself. No, he would just hunt some lone goblins in hopes of getting a free mana stone together with his kill. "I should be careful. These goblins will probably be of a higher level than the ones they let me kill back at the Arden Estate, though they are still only goblins. Even on higher levels they are quite weak." He checked his items again, and then took out his short sword. He didn't bother to talk with the farmers, and just went inside. The forest was densely packed with trees, but thanks to his smaller stature it wasn't too difficult to move around. This is when someone with a tracking class like a hunter would be helpful. He wandered through the forest while on his toes. He moved slowly while hiding behind the bushes and trees in hopes of getting the drop on the monsters. This proved to be the right choice, as he spotted 2 goblins just lazing around by another large tree. "There we go. If I only didn't need to chant this shit, level 3 and a level 4, should be fine." He could whisper the chants while casting, but that lowered the spell's destructive power by a notch. It would be enough for these goblins though. His magic attack was quite high thanks to his high intelligence stat. Source of all magic, heed my call. While performing the incantation, Roland thought back to the time of his spell training. He did a couple of tests, mostly trying to somehow circumvent those chants and incantations. He tried gathering the mana around him and through this body with the help of his skills. It worked great, all up to the moment of shaping the mana ball that would be the bolt. Right at the end it always evaporated into nothingness. It just didn't work unless he chanted while manipulating the magical energies. It was as if the spells required two passwords, one being the chant, and the other shaping the mana required for the spell. Mana bolt. The mana bolt whizzed through the air, and landed straight on the goblin's face. Roland wasn't sure why, but his aim was quite good. Maybe his dexterity had something to do with it. The other theory was the number of FPS games that he played in his previous life. The goblin's head flew backward, as if hit by a bowling ball. The small creature fell back and against the tree, blood gushing from its wound as it slowly faded away into oblivion. You have gained 20 experience points, Gigi. The other goblin looked at his companion, with surprise in its eyes, but soon it realized what transpired. Roland charged out from his hiding place, short sword in hand, and ready to deliver a killing blow. The other monster was slow to react, but it looked towards the charging 10-year-old and gave out a high-pitched scream. It moved the club it was holding up into the air, bringing it down on its enemy while jumping right at him. You goblins are easy to read. Roland skillfully evaded the attack, and just jabbed the pointy end of his short sword into the goblin's chest. The moment the attack landed, the monster gave out a wail, and started thrashing about with its club in hand. The youth backed off, letting the monster tire itself out before delivering the finishing blow. You have gained 18 experience points. That's two, not that hard. Roland looked down at the two defeated monsters. He was panting as the adrenaline pumped through his body. Through training and time, he had started getting accustomed to fighting monsters. From his perspective, a clear grasp of the situation during a fight outweighed pure stats. He pulled out his hunting knife and went for the ears, making sure to get the right one that the Adventurers Guild was asking for. He didn't feel any mana coming from these two dead bodies, which meant that they had no mana stones. This was one of the more useful uses of his mana sense skill. He could easily sense if a creature had or didn't have a mana stone in its body. Thanks to this, he saved a lot of time. Wonder if how other people do it. Do they just butcher each monster to see if it's there? Maybe they have some detection items? He squatted down and looked at the monster bodies. Their weapons were just wooden clubs, and they had no armor whatsoever. He wouldn't be able to sell anything off them. I don't think anyone would buy stained loincloths. I should probably. His body jerked to the side suddenly, just in time to dodge an incoming wooden spear that came flying in his direction. He brought out his sword to defend himself and saw two other goblins charging at him. Did the screams from these two alert the others? He had miscalculated and remained here for too long. He was used to killing monsters at a safe location, but these creatures were tribal. When one of them fell, the others would come to help. The high-pitched battle cries that these little monsters gave out were to signal their allies. Shit. He didn't think that he'd lose to these two, but there could be more coming. He couldn't stay in this location for long, and his magic bolt spell that he used as a surprise tactic was a one-time thing before the battle. He couldn't use it while running either. If he panted during chanting, the spell would collapse. He ducked for the bushes on the side, while the two angry green men chased after him. He wasn't sure how their tracking skills were, but they shouldn't be all that great. He was also faster than the two buggers. If he gained enough space, he might have been able to recast his spell. This class isn't good for solo leveling. He found himself running away just to stop and chant his incantation. When one of the goblins arrived before him, he would send a mana bolt spell right at their face. He wasn't concerned about being quiet anymore either, so his spells were packing a lot more this time around. This had the adverse effect of alerting more goblins to his location. Mana bolt. You have gained 19 experience points. Another goblin fell. The mana bolt came from somewhere up in the trees. The other green midget didn't know where the enemy was. He looked and looked only to hear a human's voice echo through the tightly packed forest. Mana bolt, you little shit. You have gained 15 experience points. Congratulations, you have leveled up. The goblin chest exploded as a large ball of mana energy pierced through it. Roland was sitting on top of a tree and just chucking his spells at the dumb goblins. After ruing away for an hour, he decided to climb up a tree. Luckily, these monsters weren't too bright. I think that was the last one of them. Glad I have this climbing and sneaking skill unlocked. He used a new tactic of just hiding up in the trees and waiting for the goblins to arrive. He delivered sure hit kills from distance and disappeared the moment another monster appeared. Thanks to his sneaking skill, the enemy monster had a hard time finding him. Before they could react, they were hit by dense mana bolts. After waiting it out for 10 minutes, he finally decided to slide down the large tree he was hiding in. He hopped down and sneaked over to the blast zone. 5 dead goblin bodies were there. He had leveled up from killing all these goblins, and there were even some scattered bodies that he left behind while running away. I don't think it would be smart to go back for those. He grabbed the 5 years from this group, and even managed to nab a mana stone from one of them. He was tired, and had wandered a bit too far into the forest area. This was the time for a tactical retreat. This is enough for today. I should go report and get my money, then take a bath. Roland's first day as an adventurer ended. He managed to return to the Adventurers Guild without a problem, and the guards didn't bother him either. The same lady that gave him the card was surprised to see him at the end of the day, and with 7 goblin ears to boot. With this, he had earned 35 large copper coins from the monster subjugation quest. The tiny mana stone he acquired went for 4 small silver coins each. He had 2 more back from his training days. With this, he was 155 large copper coins richer. I can do this. The stronger I get, the more money I will earn. I'm not going back to that log cabin, or that stinky noble house. Roland clenched his fist tightly while looking at his coin pouch. He finally saw some light at the end of the tunnel. If he worked hard, he would be able to level up his class, gain money, and later achieve his goal of independence. Chapter 10. Forming a party. A bunch of small, green, humanoid-looking creatures were shouting at each other. One of them was holding a large piece of meat that used to be a leg of some kind of boar. They gritted their teeth at each other until a larger goblin that had a darker tint of green appeared. The smaller ones covered as the meaner-looking goblin swiped away the large piece of meat for himself. It shouted something out and opened its large mouth. The teeth looked yellow and quite sharp. Before the monster could have its feast, something odd happened. A strange sound of something whizzing was heard by some of the goblins, but at that point, it was too late. A glowing blue arrow shot out of the trees and embedded itself into the larger goblin's neck. It had enough penetrating power to pierce right through. The tip was even poking out on the other side. The arrow, made from blue energy, fizzled out into nothingness soon after. The monster gurgled while not knowing what had happened. It could only flail its arms around before suffering from hemorrhage. Soon enough it passed out and died. The larger goblin's comrades started shouting and panicking, not knowing why their leader had died just like that. About 100 meters away up in a large tree was Roland. He was already chanting another spell while pointing with his finger at the next victim. Mana arrow. Another blue arrow shot through the air towards the small goblin encampment. Roland had scouted it out after spending quite a bit of time hunting the goblins in this forest. The second mana arrow landed on the next enemy, and he heard the female voice announcing that he had gained experience. I managed to get the leader on the first try. The rest are just small fries. Time to finish this up. He took his time finishing up the goblins from a safe spot. He descended only when the enemy numbers dwindled enough for him to engage them in melee range. The normal goblins didn't pose much of a threat to him at this point, and he knew their attacking patterns by heart. Now he just needed to pick up the loot and head back. The only problem was that he had to go to the Adventurers Guild again. The Adventurers Guild was bustling with people. There were various people of various races coming in and out of the building. Dwarfs, elves, you name it. There were even people with animal ears. Quite a bit of those people were focused on a small-robed youth. This youth had garnered some fame for the past 3 months he had arrived in this town. Hey, it's the little goblin slayer. Did he wipe out a nest? I think he even managed to get a shaman last time. The people from the side gossiped while looking at Roland. He was one of the rising rookies here, mostly due to having a knack for killing goblins. Most of the adventurers didn't bother with those. They were busy with dungeon exploration that had more to offer than pesky goblins. Roland grumbled while trying to cover his face with the new robe that he bought. He didn't like the attention and didn't like to stick out. I've earned a strange title. It's even in my status now. Goblin Hunter title. A person with this title is feared by goblins alike. Goblins might suffer a fear debuff while fighting with a person with this title. Works only on goblins below the title holder's level. Might suffer, so it's just a random effect. Titles like this could be earned by hunting monsters. There were various levels of titles, and some even gave bonuses to attack or defense. Roland took his money and left the Adventurers Guild while the other guild members laughed and cheered. For some reason, he had become some kind of mascot to these adventures. They would shout out "Little Goblin Slayer" the moment they saw him, which started to annoy him. Whenever he shouted back, they would just laugh at him and egg him on even more. Treating me like a kid. He entered the inn he was staying at. This was the same one that he ate his first meal at. After going through the whole city, this one was the one most in his price range. He had rented one of the rooms upstairs for himself, and was staying here for the time being. He was already high up with his levels thanks to the constant monster hunting. Roland glanced at his stats while eating some beef jerky. Name, role, Arden Mage, L20, P2, 189, 289, and P1304, 1304, C368, 368 Strength, 21 Agility, 25 Dexterity, 36 Vitality, 22 Endurance, 23 Intelligence, 72 Willpower, 50 Charisma, 11 Luck, 6. He also looked at the spells that he knew how to cast. He had made some progress there too. Mana Bolt L7 spell, a focus bolt of mana energy that deals mana damage to one target. The damage done depends on the user's intelligence. Mana Arrow L5 spell, an arrow made purely from mana, has increased speed and penetrative power compared to the Mana Bolt spell. Mana Shield L3 spell, a mana shield that shields the caster or their allies from harm. Ember L6 spell, by causing friction with mana, the caster can create a small fire. Mana Hands L5 spell, the caster can create hands made from mana. The weight and distance this spell can be used for is dependent on the intelligence stat. He had gained access to these spells mostly by leveling up. It was a strange thing, after he attained a certain level the game-like system would give him a prompt that he had learned a spell. The knowledge of how to cast it would somehow be inserted into his brain. He would instantly know the incantation and how to construct the spell with his mana. This wasn't the only way you got spells. You could learn some yourself, some people could even create them. The classes offered a limited array of spells that they could use. If he wanted more, he would have to experiment himself or buy some magic books that would explain the spell process to him. His mage class came equipped with 3 basic spells: Mana Bolt, Mana Arrow, and Mana Shield. He had learned the Ember and Mana Hands spell thanks to a book he had previously obtained at the Arden Estate. Spellbooks were extremely costly, so he was only able to get some rudimentary knowledge. The whole process of spell casting was hard to explain. The mage had to guide the mana outwards in a certain sequence while focusing on the spell formula. This spell formula was also called a spell circle. The mage had to perfectly imagine the spell circle while at the same time shaping the mana and chanting in sequence. This was quite the hard process that didn't allow for any of the steps to fail, otherwise, the spell would sizzle out. Luckily, the Tier 1 spells were quite easy to master. The spell circles were just basic symbols and didn't take much brain power to produce. This is why it was important to have a high intelligence stat that helped the caster with visualizing and recalling the spell circles. The Tier 2 classes and above were apparently even harder to work with. Higher tier spells required larger circles and even longer incantations, but this was where skills came into play as they lowered the strain on the caster's mind, if he trained them. I gain experience by leveling up my spells too. The more I use them, the stronger they become, and the faster I can do the chants. In this world, you garnered experience not only from killing monsters, you also gained it by leveling up your skills and abilities. When he managed to push his Mana Bolt spell to the next level, he received a pop-up window with the experience. It was a lot more than what he was getting from killing monsters. You could even level up by creating items if you were a crafting class. I'm almost through with my first class. Which of the two should I pick first, the blacksmith or the scribe one? The closer he got to L25, the more he deliberated. He was leaning towards picking the scribe first, as it was closer to the mage class. He would be ditching his magic skill tree soon, so he wanted to be done with it. If he switched to something like a blacksmith that had nothing to do with magic, he felt like it would be harder to get past the scroll-making class. Yeah, think that would be the better one to start out with. Probably easier too. Roland nodded while thinking back to a certain scene. That man was sitting there again. He had been here for 3 months already. By slaying the goblins and getting some mana stones from their bodies, he was able to get by on his own. This was probably something the Baron didn't take into account. At some point, he noticed that there was a certain man constantly watching him whenever he was in town. He is probably a guard sent by Daddy Dearest. I'm not sure if I should be happy that he cares, or afraid that they might drag me back home, and I'd just gotten used to this place. I might have to change locations. This was another thing on his agenda, leaving the city and setting out on his own. He was feeling good with himself. Fighting so many goblins every day had given him a slight confidence boost in his abilities. He feared that he would be dragged back. He was still a noble child, and the adults could easily overpower him if they wanted to. Well, not like that guy is even doing his job right. Even I managed to spot him with no problem. The man tailing him was quite bad at it. He only kept an eye on him during the day, and while he was in the city, he never followed him into the goblin-infested forest. Roland theorized that the people at the Arden Estate didn't want to spend too much coin on his tail, so they ended up with an incompetent one. He was even passed out drunk that one day when I came back. Wish my job was so easy. Roland had already chosen his next destination. This town he was in wasn't really suited for his needs. He was aiming to be a mostly crafting-oriented class. This city didn't really have that. It was a place for adventurers and had a dungeon, but there weren't really many places where you could learn a smithing profession. Most of the goods were shipped over from other cities that were closer to mines. The people working at those professions didn't like living next to an active dungeon. The monster-infested areas like the forest Roland used for grinding didn't help either. Yay, the best city for me now would be Edelgard. It has the facilities that I need, and if I have a crafting class, I can get an apprenticeship. Roland was already bumbling around with his mage class. He felt like he would know many more spells if he was at some sort of academy and had a teacher. He didn't want to get hired by some second-rate blacksmith and spend years on leveling up. You could actually just level up by creating items, but he wasn't sure of the logistics of that quite yet. I can learn both of those at that city. It's renowned for its crafting classes. Just need to get those 5 levels up on the next day. Roland headed out once more. Even though he had killed many goblins, the pay wasn't all that great. His leather armor was getting worn down, and he had to have his sword repaired. While grumbling to himself, he moved towards the notice board, his eyes going to the iron-class job offers. I don't see any goblin notices. Did I get them all? Maybe they run away deeper into the forest. He was known as the Goblin Slayer for a reason. He had cleared out quite an amount of nests in these past 3 months. He mostly used guerrilla tactics of luring a small group out for slaughter. He used the tall trees and thick bushes to his advantage, and even managed to level up some of his basic skills to normal ones. While Roland was contemplating his next move, a person moved over to him. The voice seemed to belong to a girl. "Excuse me, aren't you who they call the little goblin slayer?" Roland frowned instantly. He wasn't sure why, but that nickname ticked him off. The person who asked him was a red-haired girl. From the looks of her gear, she was an archer. Roland looked at her from top to bottom, coming to the conclusion that she was probably a young adventurer in her mid-teens. "I guess that's what people call me around here. My name is Roland, though," he responded while grumbling slightly. The girl smiled and then continued with the conversation. "Great. It's rumored that you are a mage in training. Is that true?" Roland raised his eyebrow and kind of figured out where this was going. The girl didn't look dangerous or nefarious, so he just nodded. He could also ask the guild staff about any other adventures if it was required. "Yes. Here is the deal. Our party is missing one person right now. We could use someone for the back line." The girl pointed to two other people that were standing in the back. With the archer, they would make a group of 3, which was slightly small for a full party. From what Roland could see beside the red-haired girl he was talking with, there was a warrior with a shield, and what looked to be someone who used daggers, either a thief or scout. The only peculiar thing about this was that all of them were female. "Oh, are you heading into the dungeon?" The girl nodded. This wasn't anything out of the ordinary. People constantly formed new parties or exchanged members with others. "Yes, we will of course do, and even split 4 ways." He wanted to rub his chin to think. He was running low on monsters to kill, and he wasn't allowed to go into the dungeon by himself with how low his rank was. This group consisted of young girls that weren't probably much stronger than him, but he could very much use the help. He didn't really have a reason to refuse. He could also ask the guild staff about these 3, and if they weren't shady later on, then decline if they were fishy. "Are you sure? I'm still just on my first class." The red-haired girl smiled and tapped him on the shoulder. "No need to worry. We just need some backline support, and you are quite famous around here. No need to be afraid. These big sister will protect you if something happens." He twitched a bit. He almost forgot that he was a 10-year-old here and looked like a little brat with some baby fat on his face. For the time being, he nodded, and he and the red-haired girl moved over to the other 2. The warrior woman was clearly from the Goliath race. She was 2 meters tall and was quite muscular. Her skin was brown in tone and her nose looked like it was squished back by a brick. The other girl was slightly taller than he was, at about 160 cm. The moment he walked up, he noticed the large animal ears coming out from the top of her head along with a bushy whitetail in the back. Her hair was gray and her eyes reminded him of a wolf. She was wearing leather armor, and had 2 long daggers strapped to her side, indicating that she was probably primed more for agility. The last girl was the redhead. She was taller than the previous girl at about 170 cm. She was wearing a really tight uniform. Around her chest was some kind of belt, probably to connect a quiver to. "He's so tiny. You sure he can handle this, Rebecca?" The large warrior girl looked at Roland while leaning down, her mouth showing off those pearly whites as she grinned. "Hey, don't scare him, Sahilder. I had enough trouble convincing him to come here." The third wolf girl didn't say much. She just gave him a glance, and then sat down at the nearby table behind them. "Ah, let me introduce you. The large dumb one here is Sahilder, the quiet one back there is Raina, and my name is Rebecca. You can just call me Becky Tilda." The 3 were peculiar looking, but they had some charm to them. They all sat down by the table and started chatting. "So, our 4th party member had left our party, and I think you would be the perfect fit," Becky proclaimed while looking at Roland with sparkling eyes. "Ha, you mean she left us hanging and run away with some guy, that damn harlot," replied Sahilder while smirking to the side. For some reason she looked like she wanted to give Roland a tug on his cheeks. Third lady remained silent while munching on a chicken leg. "Is that so? Well, I don't have a reason to refuse. Saw you looking at the notice board run out of the gobos, huh?" "Little goblin slayer, please don't call me that." Roland groaned while the girls smirked at each other. "Before we proceed, I need to ask, is there any reason why your party only has women?" Roland asked while Sahilder was the one to reply. "That's easy. We just don't trust men. They always try to start something during the night camps. Hey, does this brat even know what I'm talking about?" The woman made a circle with her hand and index finger, and then started sticking another finger through it. In and out it went. She only stopped after Becky gave her a glare. Roland deadpanned at the explanation. He looked at the 3 but wasn't all that attracted to them. It was probably due to his mental age being at 30. These girls looked to be 16, and weren't really in his striking range. He was also stuck in the body of a 10-year-old, so that was also a factor. "But I'm also a man," Roland replied while the girls looked at him. They promptly burst out in laughter. "What are you, like 11 or 12? Don't think you will be making any night visits anytime soon." Becky moved her hand over her mouth while trying not to laugh. "So they don't want to form parties with men as they try to climb into their beds at night? I'm 10, so they feel confident that I won't try to start anything. Seems logical." "Well, sure, let's go with that." "Oh, so mysterious. You're not 11, are ya?" "No, I'm 12. Are you sure? Do you even have hair down there? This is sexual harassment, please stop. The group of girls started laughing while they continued to chat. Roland also discovered that all of them were on their second, Tier 1 class already. Most Tier 2 classes had that requirement, so this wasn't something odd. He remembered that most people didn't have the luxury of having their ascension right after their 10th birthday. There was also a slight experience gain debuff to the second Tier 1 class. It also depended on the type of class and what it gave you. Combat classes had the biggest debuffs, while some lesser crafting classes could be leveled up the fastest, but they mostly gave subpar stats after leveling. They decided that they would leave after everyone prepared. They would meet up at the city gates after an hour. Roland didn't need much, so he just filled up by eating some more at the inn. He also checked at the guild and got the okay. The girls were a reputable party. The next destination would be the dungeon.